The fading sun cast a long, slanting light over the rooftops of Redemption, a small Montana town huddled against the rugged wilderness like a secret. Dust motes drifted in the air, dancing in slow motion beneath the last rays of day. Red and orange hues tinted the sky, a testament to the vast western horizon. Everyone in town seemed to walk a bit faster at this hour, either heading home or finding their way to the saloon. Twilight was a tricky time, especially in a place like Redemption, where the lines between good and evil had always blurred. High on a gentle slope in an old wooden house, with a single crooked chimney, Laura Blackwood stood by her window. From this vantage point, she observed the townsfolk moving below, as if gazing upon a stage from the wings. Her figure was slender, draped in modest black. Some might say she dressed in mourning still all these years since her husband's death. A simple black hat, a veil that occasionally shaded her features, and a well-worn shawl across her shoulders. Up close, one would notice her eyes. They held a quiet intensity, a banked fire carefully hidden behind a calm exterior. A faint scar along her left temple caught the light whenever she brushed back her dark hair. She was known in Redemption as the widow, a woman who had arrived in town nearly 7 years ago, under circumstances few remembered clearly. Some thought she lost her husband to illness or an accident. Others whispered more dramatic stories, a stagecoach robbery or a gunfight gone wrong. Still, Laura had managed to earn a small measure of respect because she seldom bothered others. She sold homemade preserves once in a while, took on sewing work, and helped folks in need with quiet kindness. Yet she kept her distance. Beneath that gentle appearance, Laura kept a small black notebook, not simply a diary, but a meticulous record of people comings and goings, suspicions and cryptic notations about potential criminals. Every day she updated it with precision. She tracked information about certain visitors to Redemption, men with questionable backgrounds, drifters who might have ties to bigger crimes. This was the last vestige of her previous life, the part of her identity she had almost lost. Laura Blackwood, Pinkerton detective, once among the best, before it all went wrong. That evening, as the light dimmed, Laura's reflection in the window became clearer. She looked tired. A pang of old grief twisted in her chest when her gaze lingered on the ring she still wore on a chain around her neck. William's ring, battered but cherished. She shut her eyes, recalling the day her entire world shattered. She remembered the blood, the unstoppable violence, and the heartbreak of realizing the man she loved had been killed by men with no mercy. A single name had haunted her dreams ever since Harlan. Laura inhaled slowly, pushing the memory back into the shadows where it belonged. She returned to her desk, an old table, bearing candle stubs, scattered papers, and the black notebook. Flipping it open, she skimmed the last entries. Harlan's men rumored to be in the region. Sheriff Thomas Reed investigating suspicious shipments at the train depot. Stranger with scar across right cheek, seen in saloon, possible associate of Frank Wolf. She paused at Frank Wolf's name, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Frank Wolf had once been Harlan's right-hand man, a loyal enforcer with a deadly aim. If Wolf was indeed in Redemption, then it meant trouble. Everything inside Laura screamed that her time of hiding was almost over. 7 years of living under a false identity. 7 years of waiting for the right moment when they would show themselves again, and she could avenge William. And now the pieces were beginning to align. She glanced at the door, half expecting someone to knock, but it remained silent. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose window frames. Laura closed the book, tucked it in a drawer, and locked it. She let her hand rest on the handle for a moment, as though bracing herself. The flicker of determination in her eyes returned. It was time. 2. The life she wore, mourning in Redemption, arrived quietly. Sunlight creeping over rolling hills and gilding the dusty main street in a pale gold. Laura opened her door and stepped outside. Her small porch overlooked patches of scraggly grass and a single withered oak. In the distance, the church bell tolled a soft note calling the faithful. This Sunday ritual usually drew a handful of the more devout citizens to the white steepled chapel near the center of town. Tugging her shawl tighter, Laura walked a well-worn path downhill. She caught the curious stares of a few neighbors who still weren't entirely comfortable with her presence. Some nodded politely. A couple turned their heads away. She was an enigma, a puzzle no one had quite solved. They called her Mrs. Blackwood, but few dared to engage her in conversation. Maybe it was something about the way her eyes hardened whenever the talk ventured too close to her past. She passed by the general store noting the closed sign on account of Sunday. The saloon ironically was open. There were always patrons who needed a stiff drink, even at mid-morning. Doc Wilson, the town's physician, was outside relatching a sign that had blown loose in the wind. A bearded man in his 60s, wiry but strong, he possessed a gentle nature beneath the gruff exterior. He tipped his hat when he saw her. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "Morning, Doc," she returned quietly, managing a small smile. "You keeping well? I haven't seen you around the clinic." "I'm fine," she lied. Part of her wanted to confide something. Anything but trust was a luxury. She offered another polite smile, then continued on her way. The wooden steps of the church creaked beneath her feet. Inside the pews were half-full sunlight spilling through stained glass. She noticed Sarah, a local orphan girl around 12, sitting in the front row, looking up at the preacher. Sarah had dark braided hair and large solemn eyes. Something about the child resonated with Laura's own sense of loneliness. For months now, Laura had noticed how Sarah wandered about offering to sweep floors or wash dishes for a little money. She had no real family. Occasionally, Laura gave her leftover food or a little coin, telling herself it was just to help a child in need. Yet she sensed a bond forming, an unspoken empathy. Laura slipped into the back pew, head bowed. She wasn't here for the sermon. She came to observe, to understand the rhythms of the town. The preacher's voice rose and fell, echoing off the walls. Laura's mind drifted back to the day she lost everything. She recalled the screams, the sight of William battered and broken, the shock of discovering she was pregnant, and then the blood, so much blood. Soon after the heartbreak of the miscarriage, she had chosen to disappear, staging her own death to evade Harlan. The Pinkertons had quietly written her off, and she had made her way here. For 7 years, she'd been content to remain silent, to gather information from afar, waiting to see if the men who killed William would reemerge. Now signs pointed to Harlan's return in search of a rumored treasure map, an old legend about a hidden gold vein beneath the region. Whispers circulated that certain corrupt individuals were involved in illegal gold mining, money laundering, and more. The threads of that conspiracy reached high places, including a figure known only as the judge. As the sermon ended, people filed out, greeting one another with subdued courtesy. Sarah lingered in the front, helping gather hymn books. Laura edged closer. "You always do a thorough job, Sarah," she said softly, causing the girl to jump a bit. "Oh, Mrs. Blackwood, I just want the church to look nice," Sarah answered, eyes cast down. Laura smiled gently. "No need to be shy." She hesitated, then extended a small folded handkerchief with a piece of homemade bread tucked inside. "Breakfast. I wasn't sure if you ate." Sarah's eyes lit up with gratitude. She accepted it and nodded. "Thank you." They were quiet for a moment. Laura felt a pang in her heart. That childlike innocence reminded her of what she had lost. In another life, she could have been a mother by now, but fate had snatched that chance away. "Take care," Laura murmured, turning to leave. Sarah looked after her with a curious mix of admiration and confusion, as though suspecting there was far more behind Laura's gentle gestures. 3 Shadows of the Past. Laura returned home, where she methodically unpinned her hat and placed it on a hook. She moved to her makeshift study and retrieved the black notebook. Her hand trembled slightly. This was it. She was about to take the first step in a plan that had been germinating in her mind for years. Something had to be done before the evil that once destroyed her family spread its grip over redemption. In the margins, she scribbled potential lines of action. Approach rumored Frank Wolf presence. Confront him or draw him into a trap. Extract information about Harlan's current operations. She paused, recalling how Wolf was the cold-blooded gunman who tortured William. Could she truly face him without losing control? A deep breath. Yes, she was no longer the naive woman she once was. She had trained herself physically, mentally, strategically. Anger still simmered beneath her calm facade, but she had learned to harness it. A faint knock on her door startled her. She snapped the notebook shut, hiding it under a stack of cloth. When she opened the door, she found Sheriff Thomas Reed standing there, hat in hand. He was in his early 40s with sandy hair and a tired, worried look. A blood-stained bandage wrapped around his left arm. "Sheriff," Laura said, stepping aside. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right," he murmured, though his face contorted with pain. "Could use a bit of your brandy if you have it." Laura guided him inside. She helped him sit on a chair while she retrieved a small bottle of brandy and clean cloth. What happened? I was out near the old train depot last night, Reed explained. Heard about suspicious cargo. Found a group of men loading crates into a wagon. They fired before I could see their faces. Her hands were steady as she poured brandy onto the cloth and dabbed at his wound. Did you recognize anyone? No, Reed admitted. But I suspect Frank Wolf. Heard rumors he's in town. I've tried telling folks to be on the lookout, but you know how some folks in Redemption are lips sealed or they pretend not to see a thing? Laura nodded, heart pounding. The sheriff had no idea that she knew everything about Wolf. Frank Wolf is bad news, she said quietly. That's putting it mildly. Reed watched her carefully. Thank you for your help. You're always prepared. She shrugged. I keep a few supplies around. Doc Wilson can't be everywhere at once. A moment of silence. Reed shifted awkwardly. Listen, Mrs. Blackwood. I don't mean to pry, but you've lived here a while. You ever see any suspicious folks coming and going? She thought quickly. Perhaps the sheriff was fishing for leads. He was a decent man, but for her plan she needed to operate from the shadows. I mind my own business, Sheriff, she replied gently. He studied her face as though trying to read something hidden in her eyes. Finally, he relented with a nod. Well, if you see or hear anything, you come to me first, all right? Of course, she offered the faintest of smiles, reinforcing her image of the helpful widow. When he left, she stared at the closed door, her thoughts swirling. She felt a stab of guilt withholding information, but involving the sheriff too early might compromise her plan. She needed the element of surprise. 4. Seeds of a Trap. That afternoon, Laura headed to the local saloon, the Dusty Mare, under the pretense of sewing repairs for the saloon keeper's daughter. The place reeked of stale beer and whiskey, a haze of smoke lingering in the air. The piano in the corner was silent at this hour, and only a few patrons dotted the tables. Behind the bar stood an older woman named Abigail Turner, who gave Laura a polite nod. I'll get Julie, Abigail said, motioning for Laura to wait at a corner table. She's got a tear in her dress that needs fixing. Laura took a seat with her back to the wall, scanning the room. Two men strangers were huddled at a table, speaking in low tones. One of them, a lean fellow with a narrow face, looked up and met Laura's eyes for a split second. The hardness in his gaze suggested he was no ordinary drifter. Laura felt a jolt of recognition in his posture and the subtle way he carried himself. Possibly a hired gun. Possibly connected to Wolf. She forced her expression to remain neutral, lowering her eyes to appear timid. Moments later, a young woman with curly hair, Julie, Abigail's daughter, approached, holding a ripped skirt. Thanks for helping, Mrs. Blackwood, Julie said. I tried to patch it, but it's a real mess. It's all right. I'll do what I can. Laura examined the tear. She kept her voice low. Julie, do you know who those men are over there, by the lamp? Julie cast a quick glance over her shoulder. Not sure. They came in last night, left for a while, and then came back this morning. They don't talk much, but they sure watch everyone else. Laura nodded, rummaging in her sewing kit. Her mind raced. If these men were part of Harlan's renewed presence, she had to act soon. She needed to lure Wolf out, and that meant feeding him a piece of bait, false information, about something that would interest Harlan's crew. The treasure map. She began stitching Julie's skirt, all the while thinking about how to plant the rumor. Perhaps she'd speak loudly about an old map discovered in the abandoned Blackwood mine. She could mention it in earshot of someone who would carry the news to Wolf. A risky move, but it could draw him into a trap. Julie thanked her and wandered off, leaving Laura alone at the table. She carefully stowed the needle and thread, but left a small snippet of conversation drifting into the air, speaking softly yet audibly enough for prying ears. I heard someone found an old trunk in the Blackwood mine. Might contain documents worth a fortune, she said as if to herself, eyes lowered. She paused as though realizing she was overheard and clammed up. Sure enough, the two men at the other table exchanged a sharp glance. Laura pretended not to notice. She stood, paid for a glass of water she barely sipped, and left the saloon. Outside, the daylight was harsh. Dust swirled around wagon wheels. Laura took a roundabout path back to her home, ensuring no one followed. Inside, she allowed herself a small, grim smile. The first move was made. 5. A memory that burns. That night's sleep eluded her. She found herself drawn to the small fireplace where embers glowed faintly. Huddling in an armchair, she opened the bottom drawer of a battered chest, taking out a folded piece of cloth. Inside was a photograph, cracked and faded, showing her and William on their wedding day. They were standing in front of a grand oak tree, smiling as though the world was theirs. William looked confident, wearing the long coat typical of Pinkerton detectives. Laura wore a simpler dress, but her eyes sparkled with the same determination he possessed. Tucked behind the photo was a tarnished Pinkerton badge. She ran her thumb across its surface. Memories flooded her, the first time she and William tracked down a gang of train robbers, the sense of justice that fueled them both, the late-night stakeouts that ended in exhausted laughter. Then came the darkest recollection, William's capture by Harlan's crew, the horrific day she arrived too late to save him. Her own captivity, the savage beating that led to the miscarriage. And finally, the decision to fake her death, bury the Pinkerton name, and resurface under an alias. She swallowed hard. Staring at the dying fire, she whispered into the silence, "It's time, William. Time to finish this." Shootouts 6. The trap is set. Over the next week, Laura quietly made sure her rumor about the Blackwood mine spread through the right channels. She visited the blacksmith, the stable, the post office, places where gossip circulated. In each location, she'd casually drop a hint about a possible trunk of valuables discovered in the old mine. Some folks dismissed it as nonsense, but a few listened with ears too eager, and that was precisely her goal. She had to move carefully. Meanwhile, she observed signs of increased tension in town. The sheriff had a fresh posse patrolling at night. Some of the local ranchers locked up their valuables more tightly than usual. And at the saloon, men with unfamiliar faces kept appearing, staying a day or two before disappearing again. Laura sensed the net drawing tighter. Finally, she heard a rumor that Frank Wolf himself was asking questions about the old mine. That same evening, a loud gunshot echoed through the main street, shattering the tense calm. Townsfolk rushed out to see who had fired. Laura, from her vantage point near the general store, saw Sheriff Reed lying on the ground, clutching his chest. She ran to him, ignoring the risk of being recognized. "Sheriff," she gasped, pressing her hands to the wound, trying to staunch the flow of blood. He was still alive, but barely. His eyes flickered with pain. "It was them," he managed to croak. Laura's jaw clenched. She looked up, scanning the darkness. Whoever shot Reed was gone. A swirl of dust in the lamplight was the only sign of their retreat. Town doctor and a few others arrived. They lifted Reed onto a makeshift stretcher. As they carried him off, Laura's hands trembled with rage. She wiped the blood on her skirt, a reminder of how Harlan's men left nothing but destruction in their wake. The next day, word spread that Reed was in critical condition. Even though she felt a twinge of guilt for not warning him, she remained resolute. She couldn't turn back now. The trap was nearly sprung. She had arranged a nighttime rendezvous in the old mine, leaving enough clues for Wolf to take the bait. At dusk, she saddled a sturdy mare, one she had purchased quietly months ago for such occasions, and rode out of town under the cloak of twilight. 7. Showdown in the Mine Act. Begins. The Blackwood mine was a relic from the gold rush era, a yawning mouth carved into the side of a rocky hill, supported by rotting beams. It lay some miles from Redemption, accessible by a winding trail that cut through pine forests. The moon was bright that night, illuminating the path in a silvery glow. Owls hooted in the distance. Laura dismounted and tied her horse among the trees, then proceeded on foot. She carried a small lantern, a revolver strapped to her thigh beneath her skirt, and a second pistol concealed in a leather holster at her waist. She wore dark trousers under the skirt, unusual attire for a woman, but practicality trumped modesty tonight. She moved quietly, her Pinkerton training surging to the forefront. Stepping inside the mine's entrance, the air grew thick with dust and the faint scent of earth. Water dripped from the walls. Her lantern cast dancing shadows across jagged rock. Further in, a labyrinth of tunnels branched off, some caved in over the years. Laura moved with caution, scanning for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the darkness. Looking for something, she froze, heart thumping. Frank Wolf stepped out from behind a beam, holding a rifle at the ready. His grin was feral, and his eyes gleamed with sadistic amusement. "I heard tell there might be some treasure stashed here," Laura said, feigning nervousness. "Treasure, huh?" Wolf spat on the ground. He had broad shoulders, a scar tracing his jawline, and an air of a predator. "Who are you supposed to be?" Laura put on her best timid act. "Just a prospector's widow." "Thought I might get lucky," he scoffed. "Widow? Sure, let's have a look around then." She pretended to comply, moving deeper into the mine. In reality, she was leading him to a spot she had prepared, a shaky support beam rigged with an improvised explosive. Not enough to collapse the mine entirely, but enough to cause a distraction and gain the upper hand if timed correctly. They reached a wider chamber scattered with old mining tools. Wolf circled her like a wolf indeed, sniffing out fear. "Something about you seems off," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Where'd you say you were from?" "Redemption," she answered curtly. His stare hardened. "Ain't no one in that town who's got the guts to come out here alone at night. Lest they're looking for trouble." In that moment, Laura let her facade slip just enough. Her eyes locked on his. "Maybe trouble's what I'm best at." He raised the rifle, suspicion dawning. "Who are you?" A blast cut his question short. The explosive in the support beam went off, rattling the chamber, sending dust and debris raining down. Wolf flinched. Laura dove behind a rusted ore cart, drawing her revolver with lightning speed. Shots rang out, echoing in the tight space. Bang, bang. Wolf fired wildly at her cover-splintering wood. Laura returned fire, each bullet aimed with the composure of a trained marksman. She heard him curse as one of her shots grazed his shoulder. Rocks fell, blocking one of the exits. She scrambled to a vantage point behind some debris. "Frank Wolf," she called, voice echoing. "You're going to tell me everything about Harlan's plan, and about the judge." Silence, then a low chuckle. "Lady, you've got no idea what you're stepping into." She peered around the corner. Wolf was clutching his shoulder, trying to staunch the bleeding. Though wounded, his posture was still dangerous. She rose, keeping her gun trained on him. A sudden rumble overhead made them both look up. Part of the ceiling was caving in from the explosion's shockwave. With a thunderous crash, rocks tumbled, blocking more of the tunnel. A thick cloud of dust engulfed them. Wolf seized the chaos, lunging at Laura. She fired once, missing as he knocked her revolver from her hand. They collided, landing hard on the dusty floor. He grabbed her throat, forcing the air from her lungs. She gasped, clawing at his arms, but he was stronger. Her vision blurred. Fighting the blackness creeping in, she reached for her hidden pistol at her waist. In a swift motion, she pressed it under his rib cage. "I will kill you," she rasped, her voice hoarse. Wolf's eyes flickered with fear and realization. Slowly, he loosened his grip. She shoved him off, coughing violently, the pistol still aimed at his chest. All right," he growled. "You want to know who's behind Harlan? Yeah, I got a name for you. The judge." "Almar, but you think Harlan's the big boss? He ain't. Never was. He's hired muscle for bigger fish. They want the map that leads to something more valuable than gold. If you kill me, you'll never get to them in time." Laura's hand shook. Anger pulsed through her. She had dreamed of killing this man for so long, but she needed more information. She needed him alive for now. She pressed the barrel into his chest. "Start talking." He coughed, spitting blood. "It's not just me. We got men in every corner. We're after the real documents, the ones that prove who owns the land. The Pinkertons had 'em once your precious William might have had 'em. But guess what? He died for it. You gonna die for it too, lady." Rage filled Laura at the mention of William. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then she remembered her vow. She was not just out for personal revenge. She needed justice. Information. She forced herself to breathe, stepping back. "Get up," she commanded. He grimaced, rising to his feet. "Why not just kill me now? Because you're going to tell Harlan that the map is here, and that you're the only one who survived." A muscle twitched in Wolf's jaw. "You want me to lie to my boss?" She kept her pistol steady. "Yes. Otherwise, I shoot you here and now. And trust me, I won't miss." Wolf sneered. "Fine, but Harlan'll come for your head." Laura mustered a cold smile. "Let him try." Suddenly, another tremor shook the mine, dislodging more rubble. A large chunk of the ceiling crashed down, landing precariously close to Wolf. He scrambled aside, but a falling beam grazed him, pinning his leg. He howled in pain, thrashing to free himself. Laura stepped back, heart pounding. The air was thick with dust. Her mind raced. She needed to get out before the entire tunnel collapsed. Wolf was pinned. Could she save him? Did she even want to? He stared at her, terror in his eyes, realizing his predicament. "Help me," he shouted, voice raw with fear. A swirl of conflicting emotions tore through her. This man was directly responsible for her husband's torture and death. She had him at her mercy. She could walk away and let the mine bury him. Justice of a sort. Yet a small voice inside her whispered that if she let him die, she'd never confirm the bigger threat, never uncover the identity of the judge. Gritting her teeth, she tried to heave the beam off him. It was too heavy. Another large rock fell from the ceiling. The exit behind her was quickly filling with rubble. There was no time. She looked at him, swallowed hard, and made a choice. She turned and ran toward the thinning corridor, escaping the looming cave-in. Frank Wolf's final scream echoed through the collapsing tunnels. Outside, the night air hit her lungs like fire. She stumbled away from the entrance, coughing, covered in dust and sweat. The mine groaned behind her, an eerie rumble as part of it gave way. She pressed her back against a boulder, panting. The plan had partially succeeded. Wolf was either dead or incapacitated. She'd extracted a crucial piece of information. Harlan worked for someone else, codenamed the Judge. Now there was no turning back. Laura wiped her brow, glancing up at the moon. She had survived, and for the first time in years, she felt the old thrill of being on a case, of hunting down the truth, no matter the risk. But as she caught her breath, she couldn't ignore a darker realization. She had let a man die, or at least left him behind to his fate. She told herself it was necessary, yet a small crack formed in the armor of her resolve. She was no longer the Laura who followed the strict moral code of a Pinkerton. She had become something else, a creature shaped by grief and vengeance. 8. Consequences. Back in town by dawn, word spread that Frank Wolf was missing and presumed dead after a mine collapse. Some said a mysterious figure was seen riding away from the area. The rumor mill buzzed with speculation. Harlan's men, scattered across the region, would soon hear the news. Meanwhile, the sheriff, still badly wounded, struggled for life under Doc Wilson's care. At her house, Laura stripped off her dusty clothes, wincing at bruises forming along her arms and ribs. She washed in cold water, trying to cleanse the memory of Wolf's terrified screams. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The first major step had been taken. She had declared war on Harlan's gang, and inadvertently she had taken a step down a darker path, her first kill in the present timeline, or so she believed. Despite everything, she felt a sense of grim satisfaction. One piece of the puzzle was gone, but many more remained. Later, she rummaged through her trunk, searching for William's old notes. She found references to a Judge Montgomery, an influential figure who worked the circuit in these territories. Could this be the same person as the judge? She needed more solid leads. That evening, she visited Robert Miller, an old associate of William's, who lived on the outskirts of town. He had been a Pinkerton once, though he left under unclear circumstances. Laura had kept her distance from him, unwilling to blow her cover, but now she needed help. Robert's small cabin was tucked near a creek, a short ride from Redemption. When she arrived, he opened the door with a wary expression. He was a tall man, hair flecked with gray at the temples. He wore a revolver at his hip, a sign he remained cautious even in retirement. "Laura," he said, blinking in surprise. I thought you were dead." She gave a tight nod. "That's what I wanted people to believe." He ushered her in, shutting the door. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a single bed, a table, a few chairs, and a clutter of old Pinkerton files. A whiskey bottle sat half empty on the table. It was clear he'd been living a solitary life. They spoke in hushed tones, and Laura laid out her suspicions. Harlan was back working for a bigger entity. She needed any intel Robert might have about the judge. He listened, face grim, a muscle working in his jaw, as if he were deciding how much to reveal. "I've heard the name," Robert finally said. "Some say he's a real judge who dabbles in dirty deals. Others claim it's just a code for a secret boss controlling half the territory. I never found solid proof." William had a lead, Laura pressed. Robert's gaze flickered. "We both did. But after William was killed, I lost my nerve." A heavy silence settled between them. Laura felt a surge of anger. "You vanished when he died. Left us to fend for ourselves. You knew the truth." He downed a shot of whiskey. "I'm sorry, Laura. I truly am. But I was outgunned, outrun, and I didn't have your grit. I got out before they came for me, too." Laura swallowed hard, trying to quell her resentment. She needed him. "Will you help me now?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubble. "I don't know. Going against Harlan and this judge, it's suicide. She leaned forward, voice trembling with determination. They murdered my husband. They nearly killed me. They're terrorizing this town. If we don't stop them, no one will. He studied her for a long moment, then his eyes hardened. All right, I have one lead. There's a mention of a secret ledger that ties certain high-profile individuals to a smuggling ring. If Harlan's boss is who we think it is, this ledger might have his signature or coded mark. She nodded, heart pounding. Where is it? He hesitated, looking torn. Locked away in a private stash in the old Pinkerton office in Helena. William hid it there before everything. Laura felt a glimmer of hope. Then we need to get that ledger. 9. Betrayal strikes under cover of darkness. They saddled their horses and set out for Helena, a trek of several hours, planning to return by dawn. Robert led the way, silent and tense. Laura followed, a swirl of anxiety and anticipation in her stomach. If they obtained the ledger, they might blow the entire operation wide open. But something nagged at her. Could she truly trust Robert? They reached Helena in the middle of the night. The old Pinkerton office stood vacant on the edge of town. The windows were boarded up, a layer of dust blanketing the porch. Laura felt a pang of nostalgia and sorrow stepping onto those creaking floorboards. Robert pried open a back window. They slipped inside, lanterns illuminating the dusty interior. The place still held the ghosts of an era when Pinkertons roamed these halls, files, scattered cabinets rummaged through by looters over the years. Laura moved to a corner where she remembered a secret safe behind a false wall. She pulled aside an old map pinned to the wall, revealing the safe's rusty dial. Robert crouched beside her, trying combinations etched in his memory. After a few tries, it clicked open. Inside lay a stack of yellow documents. Her hands trembled as she lifted the top file. Faded ink spelled out names, dates, and sums of money. She recognized some local officials in Montana, men who'd been rumored to accept bribes. This was the ledger William had spoken of. They had it. She looked at Robert, a sense of relief flooding her. We did it. His expression was unreadable. He exhaled, then gave a tight nod. Yes, we did. Before she could react, he drew his revolver, pointing it at her chest. Her blood ran cold. What she whispered, heart-hammering. I'm sorry, Laura, he said, voice low and pained. I can't let you ruin this. Harlan made me a deal. If I hand over the ledger and he'll let me walk away with my life and a cut of the treasure. I got no choice. Her shock mingled with fury. You sold out William's memory. He flinched. I never wanted it to come to this. But it's the only way. Hand me the ledger. Slowly she extended the folder. His gaze flickered to it, momentarily distracted. In that heartbeat she struck, knocking the gun aside. His shot went wide, echoing through the empty office. She kicked him in the knee. He staggered back, but he was bigger, stronger. He lunged, slamming her against the wall. Pain lanced through her side as she fought to keep hold of the ledger. They grappled in the dim lamplight. She managed to pull a knife from her boot, slicing across his arm. He shouted, dropping the gun. Blood splattered the dusty floorboards. Her heart pounded like thunder. In a desperate final thrust, she plunged the knife into his chest. He froze, mouth open in silent shock, eyes pleading. Then his knees buckled and he collapsed against her. She let out a strangled sob, lowering him gently to the floor. For a brief moment he clung to her arm, blood staining her sleeve. Laura, He tried to speak, but no words followed. His gaze lost focus, and a final breath rattled out of him. She knelt there, trembling, tears burning her eyes. Robert had once been a friend, an ally to William, and now she had killed him. The ledger remained clutched in her hand, a mocking testament to the cost of this revenge. She felt no triumph, only a hollow ache in her chest. The echoes of the gunshot rang in her ears. She had to leave before anyone investigated. She tore a piece of cloth from her skirt to wipe the blade, and her hands then took the ledger, shoved it into her bag, and rushed out the way she came. On the ride back, the weight of her actions pressed down, threatening to crush her. She had crossed a line again. No longer just a detective seeking justice. She was a woman steeped in bloodshed, chasing vengeance at any cost. 10. Return to redemption. By dawn's first light, she reached the outskirts of redemption, exhausted and shaken. Her house felt colder than ever. She hid the ledger under a floorboard, then changed into fresh clothes. She stared at her reflection, seeing a haunted expression. The death of Robert echoed in her mind. It was a turning point. She had discovered the existence of a powerful network behind Harlan, and the ledger held proof that could topple them. But in the process, she had become an executioner. She couldn't ignore the fear creeping into her soul that she was losing her moral compass. A faint noise outside the door startled her. She opened it cautiously. Sarah stood there clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" Laura asked, forcing calm into her voice. I wanted to thank you for the bread," the girl stammered. "And I heard you helped the sheriff when he got shot. Doc Wilson said so." "You're brave." Laura's throat constricted. "I'm not brave, Sarah. I just did what anyone would do." Sarah's eyes brimmed with innocence and admiration. "Sheriff Reed said you saved his life. That makes you a hero." A twisted sense of irony clutched at Laura's heart. She thought of the blood on her hands, the men she'd killed. Hero hardly. "Thank you," she managed. Sarah handed her the wildflowers, a shy smile on her lips. "For you." Laura hesitated, accepting them slowly. The gesture warmed her, stirring an unexpected emotion. In the midst of all this violence, here was a simple kindness. She smiled through the tears that threatened to escape. "Thank you, Sarah." The girl grinned. "I'll see you around," she said, then scampered off. Laura closed the door, staring at the wildflowers. She inhaled their faint scent, letting their fragile beauty calm her racing thoughts. In that moment, she resolved that she would not abandon the people who needed her. She would not let Harlan's gang destroy innocent lives. But the cost had already been tremendous, and she knew the final confrontation was still to come. Outside, the sky hung heavy with the promise of another blistering day. Laura carefully placed the wildflowers in a jar of water, then retrieved the ledger from under the floorboard. She flipped through its pages, scanning the names, searching for a direct link to Montgomery or any sign of the judge. That's when she saw the coded notation, M. Blackwood, deceased. Her heart skipped a beat. Michael Blackwood, William's younger brother, presumed dead long ago. Yet here was a mention that contradicted it. Could he be involved somehow? Her mind reeled. She needed to decode the rest of this, but her vision blurred with exhaustion. She set the ledger aside, determined to continue once she'd gotten some rest. Little did she know the next chain of events would tear her world apart once again and force her to confront more than just the ghosts of the past. The sky was a silent gray canvas as Laura Blackwood paced around her small house, restless. It had been 3 days since she'd killed Robert Miller in that dusty old Pinkerton office in Helena, a betrayal that still carved a raw ache in her chest. She hadn't slept more than a couple of hours at a time, haunted by his final pleading gaze, and the bitter realization that she could not trust anyone, not even her late husband's closest friend. In her hand, she clutched the edge of the ledger, the document that might hold the key to destroying Harlan's criminal network. She'd examined its pages again and again, fixating on the cryptic mention of M. Blackwood. She was almost certain it referred to Michael Blackwood, William's younger brother, presumed dead. But why his name would appear in a ledger of corruption alongside coded transactions linked to known outlaws baffled and infuriated her. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the loose shutters. Despite summer's approach, the air felt chilly, as though the gloom in Laura's mind seeped into the world around her. She shrugged into her black coat and moved to the door. She needed to get fresh air to clear her thoughts, maybe talk to Doc Wilson about Sheriff Reed's condition. The sheriff had taken a bullet days ago. His fate was uncertain. She stepped onto the porch. Her ribs still throbbed from the scuffle in the mine with Frank Wolf. Bruises mottled her arms from the fight with Robert. She was adept at hiding her injuries. Pain was not foreign to her, but it was relentless. She inhaled deeply, the crisp scent of pine drifting from the hills. A faint bark startled her. She looked up to see the lone wolf, a gray silhouette against the distant tree line, regarding her with cautious eyes. He had appeared several times in the past months, never attacking, always watching. The locals swore it was a bad omen, a harbinger of violence. Laura found the creature's presence oddly resonant with her own solitary existence. She stared back, lips set in a grim line. We're both predators now, I suppose, she thought. Outcasts. Just as quickly, the wolf disappeared into the underbrush. Laura forced her attention back to her purpose. She walked down the slope into town. Each day that passed, the tension in redemption seemed to coil tighter. Harlan's men were undoubtedly plotting their next move, and a bigger question loomed: who is the judge, and how does Michael fit in? But as she reached the edge of the main street, a sharp pain seized her left side. She stumbled, gasping for breath. The pain radiated from her bruised ribs, intensifying with each heartbeat. Spots danced before her eyes. Her vision blurred. She sank to her knees, teeth gritted. "Mrs. Blackwood," a voice called. Small footsteps approached. Sarah, that bright-eyed orphan, skidded to a halt beside her. "Are you okay?" Laura swallowed, blinking away tears of pain. "I'm fine," she managed, though it was clearly untrue. Sarah's slim arms wrapped around Laura, helping her stand. The girl's face was etched with concern, her gaze far too wise for someone her age. "You're hurt. Let me take you to Doc Wilson." Laura wanted to refuse. She had always been solitary, reluctant to show weakness, but the pain forced her hand. She couldn't walk another step without risking collapse. "All right," she whispered, leaning on Sarah's support. Together they half limped, half shuffled through the main street. A few townsfolk paused, watching with mild suspicion or curiosity. After all, the widow normally carried herself with a quiet, unyielding dignity. Whispers rose like dust in the air. "Isn't that Mrs. Blackwood? Why is Sarah with her? She looks awful pale." They reached the clinic, a small, tidy building near the church. Doc Wilson, a weathered man with a careworn face, ushered them in. He took one look at Laura's hunched form and led her to a cot in the back room, where sunlight filtered through a single window. "Lie down," he ordered gently. Laura obliged, grimacing. Doc Wilson carefully lifted her coat and unbuttoned part of her blouse to inspect the bruising around her ribs. He let out a low whistle. "You've got some deep contusions here, possibly cracked ribs." "How'd this happen?" She clenched her jaw, thinking fast. "I had an accident." A half-truth. More like a series of violent encounters, she thought bitterly. Doc Wilson's expression told her he didn't quite believe it, but chose not to press. "Rest is vital. Stay still. Keep the bandages snug and no sudden movements." Sarah hovered nearby, her eyes full of worry. "Doc, can I help?" Wilson nodded, instructing Sarah to fetch fresh water and some medicinal herbs. The girl darted off, determined. When they were momentarily alone, Doc Wilson turned back to Laura. "You get yourself in these scrapes too often, Mrs. Blackwood. We all wonder how you manage it." She offered a tight smile. "Just clumsy, I guess." He huffed quietly. "If you say so." Then he patted her shoulder with a fatherly air. "I'll get you patched up, but you must rest. Overexert yourself and you'll do real damage." Laura forced a nod. She had no choice but to comply, at least for a day or two. But in the back of her mind, plans churned. Harlan would not wait politely for her injuries to heal. News of Frank Wolf's death and Robert Miller's disappearance had spread like wildfire. Most folks didn't know the full story, only that something was brewing beneath Redemption's surface. Meanwhile, Sheriff Thomas Reed clung to life. A bullet to the chest had nearly stopped his heart. Doc Wilson and his nurse worked feverishly, draining infection and stitching torn flesh. The entire town, or at least the law-abiding part, prayed for Reed's recovery. A hush fell over the streets at sunset. Lanterns glimmered behind drawn curtains. People locked their doors early. An unspoken dread drifted on the wind, as though everyone sensed a storm about to break. That night, Laura dozed fitfully on the cot in the clinic. Her ribs were bound tightly with fresh bandages, the pain reduced to a dull throb. Across the room, Sarah was curled up on a chair, fast asleep. Doc Wilson had insisted Sarah go home, but the girl refused to leave. Something in her big brown eyes reminded Laura of a child who simply wanted to feel safe. In the dim glow of a single oil lamp, Laura's mind drifted through memories of William, of the Pinkertons, of Harlan's men, dragging her husband away. Then a flicker of something else intruded, an image of a young man with William's features, but colder eyes, Michael Blackwood, if he truly lived. Why would he betray his own brother's memory? Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustling noise outside the clinic door. She stiffened. No footsteps, no voice, just a soft scrape on the wood. Wariness prickled her scalp. She slid off the cot, swallowing a surge of pain, and grabbed a small scalpel from a nearby tray. Heart pounding, she crept toward the door. Sarah stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. As Laura approached, the door suddenly rattled. A quick, forceful movement, someone trying to break in. She flung it open, scalpel raised, to find a large, hulking figure in the darkness. The shape lunged at her, forcing her back into the clinic's hallway. He wore a bandana over his face, a black hat pulled low. In the gloom, Laura's eyes flashed with recognition, one of Harlan's men perhaps. He struck her shoulder, sending agony through her ribs. She gasped, staggering. Her mind screamed for her to fight. But her body was weak, and the man easily pinned her to the wall. "Where is the ledger?" His voice was low and menacing. "You have it, don't you?" She clenched her teeth, refusing to speak. The man's grip tightened around her neck. Sparks danced before her eyes. She slashed at him with the scalpel slicing through his sleeve. A grunt of pain, but he maintained the pressure. Suddenly, a sharp whack rang out, and the man jolted. Sarah stood behind him, wielding a wooden stool with trembling hands. She'd cracked it against his back. He spun with a snarl, releasing Laura. Before he could retaliate, Doc Wilson burst from a side room, brandishing an old rifle. "Get out!" Wilson bellowed. The man hesitated, gaze flicking from the rifle to the scalpel in Laura's hand. Then he snarled something unintelligible, turned, and fled into the night. Wilson dashed to the doorway, but the intruder had vanished into the shadows. Panting, Laura sank to the floor, pressing a hand to her aching ribs. Sarah stood there, eyes wide, stool still raised. "Sarah," Laura gasped. You saved me." The girl lowered the stool, her face pale. I just heard him, and I—" Doc Wilson helped Laura up. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, looking from Laura to the open door. Who was that man? Laura's mind whirled. If she admitted the truth that the ledger implicated powerful criminals, Doc Wilson and Sarah would both become targets. She forced a shaky breath. "I'm not sure she lied. A thief, maybe, or someone with a grudge." Wilson's expression was grave. "Your life seems to attract dangerous men, Mrs. Blackwood." She closed her eyes briefly. "If only you knew." "I'll be careful," she promised. But Sarah stared at her with an intensity that suggested she might suspect more than she let on. The child's voice trembled. "He asked about a ledger. Why would he think you had one?" Laura's gaze flicked away, unable to find a ready excuse. Doc Wilson sighed heavily. "Let's secure the doors and get some rest," he said. "In the morning, we'll decide what to do." Reluctantly, Sarah complied, though her eyes remained locked on Laura with a mixture of confusion and concern. By noon the next day, the news of an attempted break-in at the clinic had spread. Whispers circulated. "Someone attacked the widow Blackwood. Sheriff Reed is still unconscious. The town's on edge." A few neighbors hinted that Laura was trouble, that she brought violence upon herself. Others suggested she was cursed. Laura insisted on leaving the clinic despite Doc Wilson's protests. She needed privacy. Back at her little house on the slope, she double-checked every window and door. She pulled up the loose floorboard where she'd hidden the ledger, verifying it was still there. Tension coiled in her stomach. The intruder's words rang in her ears. "Where is the ledger?" They knew she had it. It meant there must be a leak somewhere. Someone who'd discovered Robert Miller's death, or guessed she had uncovered Pinkerton files. She felt her control of the situation slip. Harlan's people were no longer searching quietly. They were attacking her head-on. She rubbed her temple, exhaustion weighing her down. If not for Sarah's intervention, she might be dead already. Then, as if drawn by unspoken need, Sarah appeared at her door that afternoon, gingerly knocking. Laura let her in, heart heavy. Sarah stood in the middle of the modest living room, glancing around at the sparse furnishings and the dusty shelves. It was the first time the girl had been inside Laura's home. "You sure you're all right?" Sarah asked, voice small. "I'm managing," Laura answered softly. Then she gestured for the girl to sit. "Sarah, you should stay away from me. It's not safe." Sarah's lower lip trembled. "I have nowhere else to go." Her eyes darted around, finally settling on Laura with a plea. "Please don't send me away." A pang of compassion welled up. Laura recognized in Sarah the same loneliness, the same vulnerability she once felt. "I'm not sending you away," she said carefully. "But you need to understand, I'm involved in something dangerous. You could get hurt." Sarah nodded, swallowing. "But I can help. I'm good at hiding, running errands, eavesdropping even. I know every back alley in Redemption." Laura let out a dry chuckle. "This girl is braver than most grown men around here." "All right," she relented. but if I tell you to run, you run. Promise me." Sarah's eyes lit with a mixture of relief and fierce determination. "I promise." Laura guided her to the small table where she'd been studying the ledger. She flipped it open, pointing at the coded lines. "If you see these symbols anywhere in town or hear people mention them, you tell me." Sarah nodded, glancing at the strange characters, an arrow through a scale of justice, a stylized letter M, and other cryptic marks. The child traced her finger along the page. "Looks like weird shapes. Okay, I'll keep my eyes open." They spent the next hour going over simpler codes, payment amounts disguised as shipping tallies, references to hauls that likely meant contraband gold shipments, and names that might be aliases for outlaws. Laura's ribs ached, but she pushed through. She had a hunch that time was running out, and she needed every advantage she could get. The next few days passed in a haze of tension. Laura scarcely slept. Every creak of her house made her jump. She recovered enough strength to walk without doubling over in pain, but she wasn't in fighting shape. Meanwhile, she sent Sarah on small errands, fetching supplies, listening in saloons or stores for stray bits of gossip. That was how Laura learned that Harlan himself had been spotted at an abandoned barn some miles outside Redemption. According to rumor, he was recruiting gunslingers preparing for a major move. Laura's blood ran cold at the realization Harlan was getting serious. He wants that ledger and he'll tear apart the entire town to find it. Determined to take the offensive, Laura packed a small bag extra ammunition, her revolvers, a few medical supplies. She scrawled a note and handed it to Sarah. "If I'm not back by sunset, give this to Doc Wilson." "Understand." Sarah's face paled. "Where are you going?" Laura's eyes narrowed. "I'm going to find Harlan, or rather make sure he finds me." Sarah stifled a protest, nodding reluctantly. "Be careful." Outside, the dusty main street shimmered with heat. She mounted her horse, an unremarkable brown mare, with sturdy legs, and rode off. She'd heard mention that the old barn was near a dried-up creek tucked behind a stand of pines. Perfect for clandestine meetings. The ride took half an hour. As she approached the property, she spotted signs of recent traffic, hoof prints in the dirt wagon tracks, footprints. She tethered her horse a safe distance away, then crept closer on foot. The barn sat in a small clearing. Its roof sagged and the walls were partly rotted, but it seemed there were men inside, murmuring voices, the clink of spurs on wood. Laura crouched behind an old hay cart, heart pounding. She peered through a gap in the barn's wall. There in the dim interior stood Harlan, a tall, broad-shouldered man with cold eyes and a thin mustache. Around him were 4 or 5 rough-looking associates. A single lantern cast flickering shadows, highlighting the tension on their faces. "Wolf is dead," Harlan was saying, voice edged with fury. "Robert Miller is missing. We got one lead, that damned widow in Redemption. She's got the ledger, and she was Pinkerton or so I've heard." The men murmured, exchanging uneasy glances. Harlan slammed a fist on a wooden table, making them jump. "We need that ledger to deliver it to the boss. If we fail, we might as well dig our own graves." One of the gunslingers spoke up. "What's so special about that ledger anyway?" Harlan gave him a murderous glare. "You don't need to know, only that the judge wants it, and if the judge wants something, you deliver. So we're heading into town. Tear that place apart if we have to, until she hands it over." Laura's pulse quickened. She knew that if Harlan marched into Redemption with a band of killers, innocent people would be caught in the crossfire. She couldn't let that happen. Steeling herself, she reached for her revolver. Her original plan was to catch Harlan alone, but the barn was brimming with enemies. Still, maybe she could sabotage them, set a fire to break their group force. Them out, pick them off from the shadows. Risky, but it might be the only way to prevent a siege on the town. She slid around to the far side of the barn, where a broken window offered a vantage point into the straw-filled interior. She lit a small scrap of cloth with her tinderbox. Carefully, she tossed the burning scrap onto a stack of old hay, retreating quickly. It caught with a faint whoosh. Smoke curled upward, pale at first, then darkening as the flames took hold. Almost immediately, a shout rang out inside, "Fire, get water." Men scrambled in confusion. Laura circled back to the main entrance, crouched behind a water trough. 2 men rushed out, coughing, toting buckets. The third emerged, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the area. She took aim and fired. Bang! The shot slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed with a yell. Another outlaw whirled, returning fire blindly. Bullets splintered the side of the trough. Sparks rained from the barn's entrance as the flames roared higher. Laura ducked, then popped up to place another shot. Her bullet caught the second man in the leg, sending him staggering. Smoke billowed from the barn door, choking the men still inside. She braced herself. Where was Harlan? Suddenly a figure burst through the barn's side door silhouette, framed by fire. Harlan coughing, but upright, revolver raised. Laura lunged behind a rain barrel, her heart pounding. One glance told her the barn was beyond saving. Orange flames danced across the dry wood, devouring beams and rafters. She turned to fire at Harlan, but he spotted her movement and ducked behind a fallen beam. The night air exploded with gunshots and sparks. Laura felt searing heat from the barn as it collapsed piece by piece. She gritted her teeth, trying to line up a shot through the haze of smoke and swirling embers. Then Harlan made a bold dash for cover behind a broken wagon. Laura squeezed the trigger. Her shot grazed his arm. He let out a snarl of pain, returning fire. She dove to the ground, pain ripping through her ribs. She could barely breathe. Her vision blurred from the acrid smoke, tears stinging her eyes. If I pass out here, I'm dead. She managed to crawl behind a stack of barrels, checking her ammunition. 2 rounds left in this revolver. She had more bullets in her belt, but reloading now would be risky. She peered out to see if Harlan was still pinned. He wasn't. He'd vanished. Fear coiled in her gut. She scanned the yard. The barn collapsed with a thunderous roar, sending sparks high into the sky. No sign of him behind the wagon. She couldn't see any of his men moving, though moans of pain carried through the smoke. Laura rose carefully, heart hammering. Where is he? A shape lunged from her left, a flash of movement. Harlan slammed into her, knocking her revolver away. She gasped as she hit the ground, pain flaring. His boot pinned her wrist, his eyes wild with anger. Smoke clung to his clothes and ash streaked his face. Thought you could burn me alive, he spat. You'll regret that. She tried to reach for her backup pistol, but he kicked it out of her holster. Her mind raced. This is it. No weapons. Harlan's on top of me. The memory of William's final moments surged, a vivid horror she couldn't relive. She refused to die like this. With a surge of desperation, she raked her nails across Harlan's face. He snarled, momentarily loosening his grip. She twisted free and grabbed a loose plank on the ground. With every ounce of strength, she swung it at his head. The wood connected with a sickening crack. Harlan stumbled, stars dancing in his vision, but stayed upright. Laura scrambled back, searching for any weapon. Her eyes fell on a metal shovel leaning against the barn's remains. She snatched it up just as Harlan charged again. She spun, smashing the shovel's flat side into his ribs. He doubled over, wheezing, then countered with a brutal punch to her jaw. She tasted blood, staggered backward. The world tilted. Harlan lunged again, but she instinctively drove the shovel handle into his abdomen. He collapsed to his knees, coughing. Seizing the moment, she grabbed her fallen revolver from the dust. Click, click, she recocked it, aiming right at Harlan's chest. His eyes glowed with a mix of hatred and fear. Go ahead, he rasped. Do it, but killing me won't stop this. She trembled, finger hovering on the trigger. Memories of William's mutilated body, Frank Wolf's final screams, and Robert's betrayal all collided in her mind. This man had orchestrated her husband's torture. He deserved to die. Yet something stopped her from pulling the trigger. Who is the judge? She demanded, voice raw. A twisted grin split Harlan's face, blood staining his teeth. You really want to know? He spat on the ground. The judge ain't just one man. It's an entire network, a system that runs deeper than you can imagine. He chuckled darkly, wincing from pain. But you'll find your answers closer than you think. Laura's heart clenched. Closer than I think. Her mind flashed to the ledger's mention of M. Blackwood. Tell me about Michael Blackwood. Harlan's grin faltered, replaced by a cunning gleam. So you know about him too, huh? Let's just say he's not as dead as everyone thinks. He licked his cracked lips. Why don't we make a deal? You let me walk, and I'll lead you right to Michael. A chill coursed through Laura's veins. If Michael lived, then everything, William's death, her miscarriage, the betrayal, might be bound together in ways she never suspected. Before she could respond, a gunshot rang out behind her. She dove instinctively, hitting the dirt. A bullet whizzed past, lodging in the scorched barn wall. She pivoted, revolver at the ready, but her attacker was hidden in the smoke. Another shot cracked. She flattened herself to the ground, returning fire blindly. When the smoke cleared, she saw no one. Cursing under her breath, she rolled onto one knee. Harlan was gone, only a smear of blood where he had knelt. She heard the pounding of hooves in the distance. He had escaped, aided by whomever had fired those shots. A wave of nausea and frustration crashed over Laura. She slammed a fist against the dusty ground. Harlan lived. The barn burned to embers. Several of his men lay wounded or dead, but the real threat had slipped through her fingers. She had accomplished little aside from drawing more attention and losing the chance to get a straightforward confession. That was reckless, she berated herself. If only I'd waited for a better opportunity. But regret was useless now. Panting, she forced herself upright, retrieved her horse, and rode back to Redemption under the starless sky. The old barn glowed behind her like a funeral pyre, a dire symbol of how quickly her carefully laid plans were unraveling. She reached the outskirts of town near dawn. Golden light crept over the buildings, revealing a sleepy main street. Her lips were cracked, her clothes smeared with ash and blood. She needed to patch herself up, but her first priority was ensuring Sarah was safe and figuring out what to do next about Harlan and the judge. Laura dismounted by the hitching post near her house. To her surprise, a small figure sat on the porch steps, Sarah hugging her knees. The girl jumped up as Laura approached, relief flooding her face. "You're back," Sarah exclaimed, rushing to Laura. I was so worried." Laura managed a weak smile, ignoring the throbbing pain in her jaw and ribs. "Sorry to worry you, kid." She ruffled Sarah's hair gently. "It got complicated." They went inside. Laura sank into a chair, letting out a slow breath. Sarah immediately fetched a basin of water and a rag, helping clean the cuts on Laura's face. Her touch was careful, but her eyes brimmed with anxiety. "You're always coming back," hurt Sarah whispered. "If it's so dangerous, why do you do it?" Laura gazed at the child's solemn face. "Because I can't let innocent people suffer the same way I did. Because William deserves justice. Because I can't live with myself otherwise." But instead of voicing these thoughts, she merely said, "I have my reasons." Sarah's expression suggested she understood more than Laura gave her credit for. After a moment, the girl changed the subject. "I heard some folks talking. They say that Judge Montgomery's going to hold a hearing soon for the men who got hurt in the barn fire. Something about trespassing or property damage. They're blaming outsiders." Laura froze, water dripping from the rag onto her sleeve. Judge Montgomery. She recalled that name from William's old notes. He was the circuit judge who sometimes presided over cases in Redemption and nearby towns, a man widely respected, known for his stern stance on law and order. Yet in her ledger, there was a repeated reference to money funneling through a Judge M. Could Montgomery be the judge? Or was that too obvious? She swallowed, voice tight. "When's the hearing?" "In 2 days in the courthouse by the town hall," Sarah said. "Lots of folks planning to attend. Some say the men in the barn were just drifters. Others say they're part of a bigger gang." Laura's mind churned. A hearing meant an opportunity. Maybe she could glean information from Montgomery's demeanor. If he truly had ties to Harlan or Michael Blackwood, he might slip up. Or if he recognized her from somewhere, that could be telling. She had to attend, but the risk of exposing herself was high. And if the townsfolk discovered her role in that barn fire, or in the violent encounters around Redemption, she could become a pariah or a wanted criminal. She needed a plan to navigate this carefully. The following day, Laura spent her time recuperating and strategizing. She had Sarah discreetly ask around about Judge Montgomery, where he stayed, whether he traveled alone. The child discovered that Montgomery was lodged at the local inn, and that he rarely left his room except to dine in the common area. Meanwhile, Laura tried to decode more of the ledger, focusing on entries near the mention of Miss Blackwood. She found references to land deeds and mineral rights connected to the region around Redemption, old claims that might hold the rumored treasure Harlan sought. The lines suggested a scheme to launder gold extracted illegally from a hidden vein in the mountains. But the web was complex, and Laura had trouble pinning down who held ultimate authority. Early the next morning, she donned a modest gray dress and pinned her hair beneath a simple bonnet far from her usual black attire. She added a veil, hoping it would provide some anonymity. Sarah would stay behind this time for her own safety. Laura tucked a small revolver under her skirt, concealed in a thigh holster, and headed for the courthouse. The courthouse in Redemption doubled as town hall, a modest 2-story structure with wooden steps leading up to double doors. Outside, a crowd milled about, men in vests and hats, women in bonnets, all buzzing with anticipation. Laura recognized some of the local ranchers and shopkeepers, along with a few unfamiliar faces, likely the injured or captured men from the barn. Two of them stood by the door, arms bandaged, scowling under the watchful eye of a deputy. Laura slipped through the doors, heart hammering. Inside the space was cramped rows of wooden benches facing a raised platform for the judge's seat and a clerk's desk. The walls were hung with outdated wanted posters. The place smelled of musty parchment and sweat. She found a seat near the back, keeping her veil lowered. Minutes later, Judge Montgomery entered, a tall, gaunt man in his late 50s wearing a black robe over pressed trousers. He had a sharp nose and silver hair combed back meticulously. His eyes were keen, hawk-like. When he took his seat at the bench, the chatter died. Case number 7, the clerk announced, voice echoing. Vagrancy, trespass, disturbing the peace. Defendants, Everett James Sam Keller and unidentified associates. The two men from the barn stood at the front, flanked by the deputy. One had a sling over his left arm, the other sported a bruised face. Both glared defiantly at the judge. Judge Montgomery adjusted his spectacles. State your names for the record. The men grunted, giving curt answers. Montgomery leaned forward. According to eyewitness accounts, you were found fleeing a burning barn on private property. You offered no explanation for your presence there. Do you wish to speak, or shall we proceed with sentencing? Laura watched closely. The men exchanged glances, then one of them rasped. We got no money, no place to stay. We didn't set that barn on fire. It was some crazy person shooting at us. A murmur rippled through the spectators. Laura's jaw clenched. They're spinning it to paint themselves as victims. Montgomery's lips thinned. You claim ignorance, but the property owner is pressing charges for arson. And I have reason to believe you're not just vagrants. The sheriff's office found weapons on your persons. Care to explain? One man folded his arms, silent. The other spoke in a low drawl. Judge, we was defending ourselves. Our friend got shot. We was ambushed. If anything, we're the victims here. Montgomery tapped a gavel lightly. This court will decide who's a victim and who's a criminal. For now, you're both under official custody until a formal hearing can be convened. Deputy, take them. Before he could finish, the bruised-faced man lunged forward, shouting, This is a farce. You can't hold us for nothing. The deputy struggled to restrain him. Montgomery banged the gavel harder, calling for order. A wave of commotion swept through the courtroom, spectators gasping. In the chaos, Laura detected a subtle flicker on Montgomery's face. Was that annoyance or fear? She couldn't tell for sure. Then the moment passed. The deputy subdued the outburst and Montgomery glowered at the defendants. Enough, he said coldly. You'll be held in the jail until your hearing. He nodded to the deputy. Next case. As the two men were dragged away, Laura slipped outside, her pulse racing. So far, Montgomery had acted like any stern judge. No overt sign that he was part of a secret conspiracy. But that glimmer of tension in his eyes when the man accused the system of a farce lingered in her mind. She was about to leave when she heard a voice behind her. Mrs. Blackwood. She froze. Slowly she turned to see Deputy Carver, a younger man with sandy hair, regarding her in confusion. I almost didn't recognize you without all that black. Laura forced a polite nod. Good morning, Deputy. I was just observing. He studied her face. Everything all right? I heard there was trouble at your place a while back. She feigned a small smile. Thank you for your concern. I'm fine now. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Well, if you see anything unusual, come to me or the sheriff. His face fell. Though the sheriff's still recuperating. How is he? Doc Wilson says he's touch and go. But he's a fighter. Carver sighed, adjusting his hat. We need him on his feet soon. Town's getting edgy. Laura swallowed the lump in her throat. I hope he recovers quickly. With that, she excused herself, slipping away from the courthouse. A few blocks down, she turned onto a side street, her mind spinning. She had to find a way to confirm whether Montgomery was truly involved. She needed more solid proof. Maybe I can gather rumors at the inn where he's staying, she decided, or get closer to him under some pretense. That afternoon, Laura stationed herself in the dim corner of the Redemption Inn dining area. She ordered tea. She barely touched eyes, scanning the room. Judge Montgomery sat at a table near the fireplace, conferring with a portly local official. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing around. Laura strained to catch snippets of their conversation. The sheriff's condition remains critical. If he doesn't pull through, we'll need an interim appointment. Yes, but the bigger concern is the wave of violence. The barn incident. People are whispering about outlaws. We must maintain order, quell rumors. I can't have vigilantes running amok. She sipped her tea, keeping her head down. Every once in a while, Montgomery's gaze swept the room, passing over her. She felt a chill each time, unsure if he recognized her or not. Minutes later, he finished his meal and rose to leave. Laura subtly followed him to the inn's front porch. She hid behind a pillar, observing as the judge spoke briefly with someone, another official or perhaps a colleague. Then he walked off, heading toward the church at the end of the street. Laura followed at a distance, her footsteps light. The sun was low, bathing the town in an orange glow. Montgomery's stride was purposeful. He reached the church, opened the door, and slipped inside. Intrigued, Laura crept up, peering through a side window into the silent nave. She nearly gasped. Harlan was there, half concealed behind a pillar. Harlan meeting with the judge. Alarm bells blared in her mind. This was proof of an alliance. She pressed herself flat against the church's exterior wall, straining to hear. Montgomery's voice was cool, barely more than a whisper. You're reckless. Burning barns, gunfights in the street. That's not how we do things. Harlan's reply hissed with anger. That damn widow nearly killed me. She's got the ledger, and if she hands it over to the feds, Montgomery cut him off, calm and firm. I told you to handle it quietly. Now the entire town is in a panic. We can't afford more scrutiny. If the sheriff recovers enough to investigate, or if the Pinkertons catch wind of us, Harlan's frustration boiled over. Then do something about it. Isn't that your job? You keep the law at bay while we handle the groundwork? Laura's pulse hammered. This was the confirmation she dreaded. Judge Montgomery was involved at a high level, orchestrating a facade of law while facilitating criminals behind the scenes. She wondered if he also had ties to Michael Blackwood, or if that was another layer. She forced herself to breathe quietly, taking mental notes of every word. Montgomery sighed. The bigger matter is that my superiors expect results. The judge is not just one person, Harlan. It's an institution. If you fail to acquire that ledger, the entire operation is compromised. Funds, land, deals, everything. We'll lose years of work, and we can't allow that. Understand, Harlan muttered a curse. Don't worry, we'll find her. We'll take that ledger, and we'll kill her if we must. She's just one woman. Montgomery's voice turned icy. One woman who's eluded you thus far. You'd best not underestimate her again. They conferred in hushed tones for a few more moments, but Laura couldn't catch the rest. Her heart slammed against her ribcage. If they left the church, they might spot her. She had to retreat. She crept away, careful not to make any noise, and ducked around the side of the building. The gravity of what she'd just learned weighed on her like a millstone. Montgomery is not just an ally to Harlan. He's a leader in some network called the Judge, like a chain of command. This runs deeper than one man's corruption. She made her way back home under the gathering dusk, fear fueling each step. She felt sure Montgomery would soon discover her identity as the Pinkerton widow. And then they'd come after her full force. She had to warn the people of redemption somehow. But if she announced the judge was a criminal mastermind, who would believe her? He was the law, at least in outward appearance. When she reached her house, Sarah awaited, her eyes bright with relief. You're safe, the girl breathed. Laura nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. She invited Sarah inside, locked the doors, and lit a single lamp. They sat at the table. Laura, trembling, recounted the meeting in the church. Sarah's face paled. Judge Montgomery is working with Harlan, but he's supposed to protect us. Laura's hands curled into fists. That's the facade. He's using his position to control the region, launder money, and ensure the criminals do his bidding. There's a bigger network behind him, too. Sarah's eyes flickered with fear. So, what can we do? Laura exhaled shakily. We prove it. We gather enough evidence from the ledger, from the Pinkerton archives, from eyewitness accounts. Then we get it to federal authorities, who have the power to arrest a judge. Laura glanced at the sealed envelope in her trunk, the one she'd kept as a last resort, addressed to the regional Pinkerton headquarters. She'd considered sending it many times, but had always hesitated, afraid of tipping off Harlan too soon or losing control of the situation. Now it seemed inevitable. I might have to contact my old superiors, she murmured. Sarah nodded, though she looked uneasy. Is that safe? No, Laura admitted, but it may be our only option. That night, the final blow fell, and it came from a direction Laura never anticipated. She was in her study forging a coded message for the Pinkertons when a sudden hush settled over the town. No wind, no chatter. An uncanny stillness that made the hairs on her neck prickle. A frantic knock broke the silence. Laura seized her revolver, motioned for Sarah to hide. She swung open the door to find Doc Wilson face-stricken with grief. "It's Sheriff Reed," he said, voice trembling. He woke briefly, but I couldn't save him. He's gone." Laura's heart lurched. Reed had been the last bastion of official law and redemption, a decent man who believed in justice. She knotted her throat tight. "I'm so sorry." Doc Wilson's hands shook. "We tried everything. He said your name. Laura." Before he trailed off, eyes brimming with tears. A wave of guilt crashed over her. She'd withheld information from him, kept him in the dark. And now it was too late. "Thank you, Doc," she whispered. "I appreciate you telling me." He stared at her for a long moment. "He believed in you. Said you could protect the town." Then he let out a ragged breath and left shoulders bowed with grief. Laura closed the door, her heart heavy as lead. She sank onto a chair, burying her face in her hands. Sheriff Reed was dead. The final thread of stable authority and redemption had snapped. Now Harlan and Montgomery could tighten their grip with little resistance. Sarah approached quietly, resting a small hand on Laura's arm. "I'm sorry," the girl whispered, eyes full of sorrow. "What happens now?" Laura swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "We keep fighting," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's all we can do." But the night held one more cruelty. A pistol shot shattered the silence outside, followed by a shriek. Laura and Sarah jolted upright. Through the window, Laura caught a glimpse of torchlight near the outskirts of town, a flicker of orange dancing against the darkness. They rushed outside. A group of townsfolk was gathering near a dirt path that led to the deserted farmland. Laura pushed through, revolver in hand. "What's happening?" someone shouted. "They got the girl." Harlan's men took her, confusion roiled. "Which girl?" her heart hammered. She turned to Sarah, still there, trembling at her side. Then a voice cut through the chaos. "They took Abigail Turner's daughter." Another cry, "They shot her brother dead." Laura's stomach dropped. Julie Turner, the saloon keeper, Abigail's daughter, the girl Laura had once helped with a torn dress. Another innocent victim. The crowd seethed with anger, half of them armed, but uncertain who to shoot. Shots echoed in the distance, then silence. Someone said they saw a wagon speeding north, carrying the terrified girl. Others swore the kidnappers demanded a meeting with the widow Laura and the ledger, or they'd kill the hostage. Fear ignited among the townspeople. Some stared at Laura with accusatory eyes, as though blaming her for the violence. A burly man, clenched fists trembling, spat on the ground near her feet. "Ever since you came, troubles followed. Maybe it's time you leave." A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd. Laura's cheeks burned. Her heart twisted in shame and anger. She wanted to scream that she'd been in redemption for 7 quiet years. Trouble only came when Harlan returned, but she knew the crowd's fear stoked by the kidnappers made them irrational. They needed someone to blame. Suddenly, Abigail Turner stumbled forward, face streaked with tears. "They have my baby," she sobbed, seizing Laura's hands. "Please, you have to do something." Laura's chest tightened. This was exactly what she had feared, innocence caught in the crossfire. She nodded. "I'll get her back," she vowed, ignoring the mutters of protest from others. "I promise." Abigail's broken eyes searched hers. Then she nodded, tears falling onto her blouse. At dawn, a note arrived, pinned to Laura's door, a crude scrawl. "Bring the ledger to the abandoned mineshaft at dusk. Come alone. If you alert anyone, the girl dies." It was signed only with a shaky X, but the meaning was clear. Harlan wanted a direct exchange, the ledger for Julie Turner's life. The abandoned mineshaft likely referred to an older, smaller mine near the creek, different from the collapsed one where Wolf had met his fate. It was a prime location for an ambush. Laura stared at the note, frustration coiling in her gut. "Even if I give them the ledger, they'll likely kill Julie anyway. And me." But she had no choice. She couldn't let an innocent girl die because of her vendetta. Sarah hovered beside her, wringing her hands. "Is it a trap?" "Yes," Laura said flatly. "But I have to go." The day crawled by in a haze of tension. Laura gathered supplies, ropes, a small stash of dynamite left over from William's old Pinkerton gear, her guns fully loaded. She placed the ledger in a satchel, though she considered stuffing it with worthless papers and leaving the real ledger hidden. But Harlan might notice the switch if he knew how it looked inside. She decided on a compromise. She'd carry the real ledger, but only hand it over if Julie was safely in her grasp. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in stripes of red and orange. Laura left Sarah at home with strict instructions to lock every door and window. Then she rode out to the mine shaft, dread knotting in her stomach. When she arrived, the place looked deserted, just a yawning black hole and a rocky slope brush tangled around the entrance. She dismounted quietly, tethering her horse to a post behind some boulders. She approached on foot, revolver drawn, the ledger's strap slung over her shoulder. A faint rustling near the entrance. Laura called out, voice echoing, "I'm here. Show me the girl." A moment later, two armed men emerged from the shadows, guns leveled. Behind them, Julie Turner knelt on the ground, wrists bound, a gag in her mouth. Her wide eyes brimmed with terror. A bruise discolored her cheek. Harlan stepped out next shoulder, bandaged his face, still bearing cuts from the barn fight. He wore a twisted grin. Well, well, the widow does care. Laura's voice shook with rage. "Let her go." He chuckled. "Ledger first. Hand it over." She glared at him. "Untie her. Then you get the ledger." He motioned to a henchman who dragged Julie forward. The girl whimpered behind the gag. Harlan took a step closer, scanning Laura's features. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Pinkerton. More than your husband ever did." At the mention of William, a surge of anger blinded Laura. Her hand tensed on the gun. She forced herself to stay calm, mindful that one reckless move could end Julie's life. "I have the ledger," she said, patting the satchel. "Give me the girl. We'll trade simultaneously." Harlan smirked, nodding to the henchman. The man shoved Julie toward Laura, who in turn tossed the satchel forward, letting it land at Harlan's feet. They watched each other warily, guns raised as the exchange happened. Laura caught Julie, steadying the trembling girl and pulling off the gag. "Go," she whispered to the child. "Run back to your mother." But as Julie tried to flee, one of Harlan's men lunged, seizing her arm. "Not so fast," he growled. "We ain't done here." Laura's heart twisted in fear and fury. "You lying bastard," she spat at Harlan. He shrugged, rifling through the satchel to confirm the ledger was inside. Then he chuckled. "I learned my lesson, never trust a Pinkerton. Now I have the ledger and the bargaining chip." Laura tightened her grip on the revolver. She had one chance. Her mind flashed to the small stick of dynamite hidden in her coat pocket, her fallback plan. If she created enough chaos, maybe Julie could escape. With lightning speed, Laura dropped her gun hand to her side, feigning surrender. Harlan smirked. Then in one swift motion, she jerked out the dynamite, lit the fuse against a rock, and hurled it toward a boulder near the mine entrance. "What the?" Harlan shouted, eyes going wide. Laura tackled Julie to the ground, shielding her as the dynamite exploded with a deafening boom. The blast echoed through the ravine, sending dust and debris flying. Harlan and his men stumbled back in confusion, one man's hat blown off by the shockwave. Now Laura sprang up, dragging Julie with her. Smoke billowed around them. She fired blindly at a shape in the dust, one shot, two. A cry told her she'd hit someone. "Run!" she screamed at Julie, pushing the girl toward cover behind some rocks. Harlan's furious roar sounded through the haze. Gunfire erupted, bullets whizzing past. Laura rolled behind a protruding outcrop, reloading with shaking hands. She saw the satchel lying on the ground near Harlan. He clutched it protectively. The ledger is in his hands. She ground her teeth. She couldn't let him escape with that ledger, but saving Julie's life was paramount. She spotted the girl crouched behind a boulder, sobbing quietly. With covering fire, Laura darted over, grabbed Julie's wrist, and pulled her deeper into the brush. A bullet grazed Laura's arm, a burning sensation ripping through her sleeve. They tumbled onto a narrow trail. Breath ragged, Laura glanced back. Harlan and his men were regrouping silhouettes in the swirling dust. She seized Julie's shoulders. "Go back to town. Don't stop." The girl nodded, eyes full of terror, and sprinted away. Laura turned, fury surging. She was done running. She aimed at the closest thug, squeezing the trigger. He staggered back, collapsing. Another man fired but missed in the poor visibility. She sidestepped, returning fire, her shot tearing through his leg. Harlan's voice sliced through the chaos. "I've got the ledger, Pinkerton." "You lose." Laura glimpsed his figure slipping away toward the mine's entrance. She sprinted after him, every muscle screaming. He reached the mouth of the shaft and whirled, firing at her. The shot slammed into her side, not a direct hit, but enough to knock her off balance. She bit back a scream, slumping against the rock wall. Harlan aimed again. Time to end this. A sudden figure loomed behind him, a man in a black coat, face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. Laura's mind reeled. Was it another of Harlan's men? But the stranger seized Harlan's arm, twisting it brutally. The gun clattered to the ground. "What the?" Harlan gasped, face contorted in pain. The stranger wrenched Harlan's other arm behind his back, forcing him to drop the satchel. In a hoarse whisper, the newcomer growled, "We're not done, brother." Brother, a shard of understanding stabbed Laura's mind. She coughed, blood flecking her lips. Was this Michael Blackwood? The mention of brother had to mean William's younger sibling. But was he talking to Harlan? Wheezing in confusion, she pushed off the rock wall. Pain thundered through her body. Harlan struggled under the stranger's grip, eyes wild. "Let me go, you son of a—" The man twisted Harlan's wrist further. "You fail me again, Harlan, and you answer to the judge." Laura's vision wavered. She couldn't be sure she was hearing correctly. The man's voice was cold, relentless. Then he slammed Harlan's head against the rock, rendering him unconscious. The ledger lay at their feet, pages scattering in the dirt. "Michael!" Laura croaked, forcing herself upright. The stranger turned. In the dim light, his features resembled William's, same strong jaw, same pale blue eyes. But a cruel edge haunted those eyes, a bitterness honed by years of darkness. He saw Laura, and for an instant sorrow flickered across his face. "Hello, sister-in-law," he murmured, voice taut. She swallowed thickly. "You're alive." He nodded once. Long story. Her thoughts spun in a whirlwind of shock, pain, relief, and confusion. She looked at Harlan's unconscious form, then back at Michael. "You are part of the judge." Michael knelt to pick up the ledger, flipping through it with a grim expression. He glanced at her wound, a flicker of concern creasing his brow. "Yes," he admitted. "But I have my reasons." Before she could muster a reply, her vision blurred and she collapsed to her knees. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving only white-hot agony in her side. Michael rushed forward, cradling her head. She tried to push him away, but she lacked the strength. "Easy," he said, pulling out a handkerchief to press against her wound. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have saved you from Harlan." Laura's head lolled. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the blackness swallowed her. The last thing she felt was Michael's grip, oddly gentle, and the faint sound of approaching horses. Laura drifted in and out of consciousness. At some point, she felt the rhythmic jostle of being on horseback, then the dim interior of a cabin, a warm blanket, and the coppery tang of blood in her mouth. Shadows moved around her, voices echoing as though from a distance. When she finally opened her eyes, she lay on a small bed in an unfamiliar room. Rough wooden walls, a single window revealing a moonlit sky. A lantern burned low on a table. She tried to shift, biting back a cry as her side throbbed. Bandages wrapped her torso. A figure loomed by the window, Michael Blackwood. He turned at the sound of her groan, stepping closer. In the soft light, she saw how much he resembled William, though William's kindness was absent, replaced by a guarded hardness. "Stay still," he said quietly. "You've lost a lot of blood." She tried to speak, but her throat felt raw. He offered a cup of water, which she sipped, wincing. "Where am I?" she rasped. "A safe place," he replied, not elaborating. "An abandoned cabin in the hills outside Redemption. I brought you here so you could heal." She shot him a suspicious glare. "You're working for the judge. For Harlan." His jaw clenched. "I'm working with them, not for them. There's a difference." She mustered her strength, forcing her voice to steadiness. "Why?" Michael exhaled, gaze distant. "Because I believed William betrayed me once. I was promised revenge and power. But I learned the truth, he never betrayed me. I realized too late." A swirl of emotions tore through Laura. Anger, confusion, sorrow. She wanted to lash out, but her wound rendered her helpless. "You helped them murder your own brother." Her voice shook with rage. He looked pained. "I didn't know what they had planned. By the time I found out it was done, I was in too deep, entangled with the judge's network, indebted to men more dangerous than Harlan. I should have walked away years ago, but I was bitter, resentful. Believed my brother had left me to rot." I was wrong. Tears stung Laura's eyes, half from pain, half from heartbreak. She recalled William's diaries, how he always worried about Michael, how he tried to protect him. He loved you, she whispered. He never betrayed you. Michael's face contorted. He rubbed a hand over his eyes as if trying to wipe away guilt. I know that now, but I've done terrible things in the name of the judge. I can't undo them. Laura swallowed. Why save me? He laughed bitterly. Because you're the only person left who can expose them. I thought I could sabotage them from within. But I'm one man. They have tentacles everywhere, courts, banks, law enforcement. Harlan is just muscle. Montgomery is a puppet. The real power structure is deeper still. If you can bring the ledger to the right people, you might topple it. She stared at him, anger swirling. Then why take it from Harlan? Because if Harlan had it, the judge would get it. Now I have it, and you. She tried to sit up, dizziness washing over her. Give it back, she demanded, though her voice came out weak. He didn't move. First you need to recover, then we'll talk about a plan. Laura trembled with rage and exhaustion. She yearned to fight him to avenge William, but her body refused. Finally, she sank back, wincing. Fine, but if you betray me, I'll kill you. An ironic smile curved his lips. Understood. Exhaustion pulled her under again. As she drifted, she felt Michael's hand on hers, a gesture of odd tenderness in a world drowning in betrayal. She hated him, but a small part of her sensed that despite everything, he might be her best chance at dismantling the judges. The first thing Laura felt upon regaining consciousness was pain, dull throbbing but strangely numbed by a bandage around her midsection. She cracked open her eyes to find herself still in the small cabin in the hills. Moonlight bled through the window, silvering the rough planks of the walls. Her mouth was cotton dry, and her heart pounded from a surge of disorientation. She shifted, hissing at the stab in her side. The bullet that Harlan lodged in her flesh had been removed, though the wound burned fiercely. A faint light came from a lantern on the floor. Near it, Michael Blackwood sat with his back against a wooden crate, arms folded, his eyes half-lidded, as if deep in thought. He wore a simple shirt stained at the cuffs with dried blood, likely hers. At the sound of her movement, he turned his head, face carved with quiet tension. You're awake. Laura forced herself upright. Her side flared with agony. She bit back a groan. How long, she rasped. 2 days, he replied. You had a fever, delirium mostly. Tried to leave a few times. A ghost of a smirk tugged at his lips. I had to stop you. She frowned, mind trying to piece together half-remembered fragments of fever dreams. You tended to me, he shrugged. I patched the wound as best I could. Gave you water, forced some broth down your throat. I'm no doctor, but it kept you alive. Alive. The word weighed heavily. She studied him, still struggling to reconcile the kind face she remembered from William's old photographs with the hardened man before her. I remember you as a skinny kid with a bright grin, she murmured, voice scratchy. William was so proud of his little brother. Now here you are, an enforcer for the same network that killed him. A muscle twitched in Michael's jaw. I never wanted him dead. The room crackled with tension. Laura wanted to unleash a storm of accusations. You were complicit, but she saw guilt in his eyes. She took a shaky breath. So, what is your plan now? You said you're sabotaging the judge from within. Why wait until now to reveal yourself? Michael exhaled. Because until recently I believed lies. I believed William left me to rot in a debtor's prison in Kansas. Harlan was the one who saved me. He bailed me out, brought me into the network, told me William never cared. I was angry, naive. He paused, glancing at the floor. But last year I got a look at William's personal journal. It detailed the money he sent on my behalf, the letters he wrote that never reached me. By the time I realized the truth, I was in too deep with the judge. So you decided to bide your time, Laura said bitterly. He nodded. I tried to learn all I could about their plans so I could eventually destroy them. But they're bigger than I realized, powerful enough to infiltrate the Pinkertons, the courts, the banks. If I attempted to take them down alone, they'd bury me. Laura let silence fall between them. A swirl of conflicting emotions rose in her chest. Anger, pity, suspicion, a faint glimmer of hope. She cleared her throat. Where's Harlan unconscious back in the old mine shaft? Michael's eyes darkened. Or possibly gone by now. I left him there after I knocked him out. If he's still alive, he's likely crawled off somewhere to regroup. A prick of worry needled Laura's thoughts. If Harlan escapes, he'll wreak more havoc. But there was little she could do from this cabin while wounded. She clenched her hands on the blanket. What about the ledger? Michael rose and crossed the small space, picking up a satchel resting near the door. He rummaged briefly, then pulled out the ledger, placing it gingerly in Laura's lap. I've kept it safe. She stared at the worn cover, mindful of its power. You didn't destroy it. It's the only evidence strong enough to topple the judge, he said grimly. But not on its own. We need more witnesses, additional records, or a direct confession from higher-ups. We have to link the corruption to a name or face that the federal government can't ignore. She nodded, flipping through the ledger's pages. We found references to Judge M. We thought it was Montgomery. Michael shook his head. He's one piece, but not the top. He's crucial, though. He runs the circuit court that quietly legalizes false land deeds, dismisses charges against gang members, and funnels money where it needs to go. Judge M stands for Montgomery, yes, but the figure calling the shots is simply known as the judge, a network using Montgomery as a front. Laura's blood ran cold. She remembered hearing Montgomery and Harlan talk about superiors who demanded results. So there's an even higher rung on the ladder. How do we expose them? She asked, voice trembling, with a mix of fear and determination. Michael's gaze bored into hers. By bringing the ledger and everything we've got to the federal marshals or the Pinkerton headquarters if you trust them. Show them how deep the rot goes. But to do that, we need to survive long enough and gather more proof. Montgomery always covers his tracks. If he senses we're on to him, he'll vanish behind the shield of his powerful allies. Laura closed the ledger, heart hammering. The people of Redemption are in the crossfire. We can't just run off to the feds without ensuring the town is safe. He nodded slowly. They're planning something big. Harlan mentioned a final push, some kind of orchestrated chaos that sets Montgomery up as the heroic judge. Meanwhile, the judge's men would seize control of the gold veins around Redemption, with no local law strong enough to stop them. Laura clenched her fists. We won't let that happen. Despite Michael's urging, Laura insisted on returning to Redemption after just 3 days of rest in the cabin. Her wounds still burned with each step, but her sense of urgency outweighed the pain. Too many innocent lives, Sarah Doc Wilson, Abigail, Julie Turner, half the town were at risk. Near dusk, Michael helped her onto her horse, a muscular bay he'd brought up from a nearby ranch. She assumed it had been quietly borrowed or stolen. She decided not to ask. The ride back was grueling. Each jolt of the trail sent pain lancing through her side. She pressed a hand to her bandaged torso, biting her lip to stifle groans. Michael rode beside her in somber silence. Occasionally he'd glance over, concern flickering in his eyes. But neither spoke much. They shared an uneasy alliance bound by William's memory and a mutual hatred for the judge. Yet Laura couldn't fully trust him, not after the years he'd spent within the enemy ranks. Twilight enveloped Redemption as they arrived. They dismounted on a ridge overlooking the small valley. The dim glow of lanterns speckled the town. Smoke curled from a few chimneys. It all seemed deceptively peaceful. Michael tied the horses to a scrub pine, scanning the horizon. We should move carefully. If Harlan or Montgomery catches wind that we're both alive together, no less they'll double down. Laura nodded. I need to see Sarah. She's just a child caught in this mess. We can lay low at your house, Michael offered. Let me scout first. She shot him a guarded look. I'll do my own scouting. The last thing she wanted was to rely on him entirely. He grimaced but didn't argue. Fine. Meet me back at your place. Don't take any chances. They parted ways near a narrow alley. Laura slipped through the shadow's cloak drawn tight to conceal her face. Her heart twisted as she passed the silent saloon, remembering how the kidnappers had taken Julie Turner. Is she safe now? Did she make it back? She'd had no chance to confirm. Her plan had been to send the child fleeing toward town, but everything afterward was chaos. Skirting the side of the building, she peered through a window. Inside, a handful of patrons drank with grim expressions. She spotted Abigail Turner behind the bar, eyes red-rimmed but steady. A small figure Julie helped to clear tables. Relief washed over Laura. The girl had made it back safely. They were both alive. Laura suppressed the urge to slip inside and reassure them. She couldn't risk it yet. She was a wanted target by Harlan's men and possibly suspicious in the eyes of some townspeople who blamed her for the violence. She pressed on, heading toward her own house up the slope. A soft voice called out from the darkness of a narrow passage, "Laura." She jerked around, hand on her revolver, but it was only Sarah stepping from behind a stack of crates. The girl wore a tattered shawl, face thin and worried. Laura breathed relief mixing with alarm. "You're all right?" The girl nodded, eyes brimming with tears she tried to hide. "I've been staying with Doc Wilson some nights, but he's real busy with people hurt by the shootouts. Some folks, they blame you for stirring trouble." She trembled, swallowing. "Where were you?" Laura bowed her head. "I got shot. Someone helped me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to vanish." Sarah's expression flickered with anger and concern. "Abigail's daughter Julie came back. She said you saved her from Harlan. Then Harlan started spreading word that you're an outlaw, a traitor to the Pinkertons who's after gold. Judge Montgomery's men are telling everyone to beware of you." Laura sighed, feeling old and weary. "They're twisting the truth." She gently rested a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I promise I'm trying to protect this town." Sarah sniffled, nodding. "I know." "Where'll you go now?" Home, Laura answered softly. "I need to plan our next move. But it's dangerous. Stay with Doc Wilson. Stay hidden." A glimmer of fierce determination flared in the girl's eyes. "I want to help." Laura couldn't help a half smile. Sarah reminded her of herself at a younger age, unwilling to stand aside while injustice raged. "You'll help by staying safe, all right. If I need you, I'll find you." Sarah hesitated, then reluctantly agreed. "Okay, just, don't disappear again." They exchanged a brief, desperate hug. Then Sarah melted into the shadows, heading toward the clinic. Laura turned uphill each step, echoing with renewed purpose. "I have to end this. Soon." Laura slipped into her house through the back door, ensuring no one followed. Inside, the place felt colder, emptier than before. She lit a single lamp, scanning for any sign of intrusion. Nothing seemed amiss. She sagged into a chair, exhaustion tugging at her. Minutes later, the door creaked, and Michael entered quietly. "All clear," he murmured, closing the door. "No watchers that I could see." Laura rose on shaky legs, holding her side. "We need to figure out how to get the ledger's contents to the feds. The nearest federal marshal's office is in Great Falls, isn't it?" Michael nodded. "Around 2 days' ride if we push. But Montgomery might have men stationed on the roads. Also, Harlan may be lying in wait." She paced in a slow circle, biting her lip as she tried to think. "If we ride out openly, we'll be ambushed. We need some way to draw Montgomery and Harlan into a trap, or at least distract them so we can deliver the evidence." He arched an eyebrow. "Set a trap in Redemption." She considered it, weighed the risks. "They're planning something big, right? Possibly another kidnapping or a stage riot. Something that lets them swoop in as saviors while eliminating me. If we force their hand at a time and place of our choosing, maybe we can corner them. Then if we can record or witness their confession, or find incriminating documents that, plus the ledger, might be enough to blow this wide open." Michael scratched at stubble on his chin, eyes narrowed. "It's dangerous, but if we succeed, they'll be so thoroughly exposed that their powerful allies can't protect them. The question is how to bait them." Laura remembered the hushed conversation she'd overheard between Montgomery and Harlan. They said the judge demanded the ledger or else. They also wanted the hidden gold veins and land deeds. She grimaced. "They still want the ledger. We can use it as bait again." He grimaced. "And risk losing it. It's the only thing they value enough to come out of hiding. We set a time and place for a final exchange. We threaten to send the ledger to the Pinkertons if they don't appear in person." Michael exhaled, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "You're as stubborn as William was." "All right, let's do it." They planned late into the night. The next morning, they'd slip into town, spread rumors that Laura had a proposition for Montgomery, that she would publicly surrender the ledger at the town hall if he guaranteed safe passage for her and her accomplice. If Montgomery bit, he'd come with his men. They'd find a way to corner him. Meanwhile, Michael would quietly arrange a courier, a loyal friend of William's from the old days, to deliver a sealed statement and partial ledger pages to the Pinkertons if the plan went south. The notion of confronting Montgomery in the town hall, the seat of law that he had perverted, felt poetic. It would be the last trial in Redemption, one that could decide the future of the town. At dawn, Laura disguised herself in a plain brown dress and a worn bonnet. Michael accompanied her through back alleys. They found a few sympathetic townspeople, Abigail Turner, Doc Wilson, and a rancher named Thomas Alvarez to help plant the rumor that Mrs. Blackwood wanted a peaceful resolution, with the judge offering the ledger in exchange for safe passage out of the territory. Each ally in turn spread the word discreetly, ensuring it reached the ears of Montgomery's watchers. Abigail eyed Laura warily as they spoke in hushed tones behind the saloon. "I don't like this plan," she said, arms folded. "He has no honor. He'll just kill you." Laura's eyes were heavy with resolve. "Maybe, but if we don't do something more, innocence will be taken, and Montgomery will strangle this town under corrupt law. Think of Julie's future." Abigail's face tightened, tears threatening, but she nodded. "All right, I'll tell folks you're ready to negotiate. I just pray you know what you're doing." Meanwhile, Doc Wilson gave Laura one last checkup of her wound, mouth set in a grim line. "Your healing is slow. You're risking your life." Laura clenched her jaw. "I risk losing far more if I stay idle." He sighed. "Then I'll do my part." By midday, the rumor had circulated enough that a hush descended over the townsfolk. Some whispered that the widow Blackwood had turned herself in. Others claimed the judge was meeting her to strike a devil's bargain. Tension hung thick in the dusty streets, as though everyone sensed a final showdown. That evening, as the sun dripped toward the horizon, Laura and Michael made their way to Town Hall, a two-story worn-out building that doubled as the local courthouse. They carried the ledger in a locked metal box to give the illusion of caution. Doc Wilson accompanied them, feigning neutrality in case any medical help was needed. Laura's heart hammered beneath her ribs. She wore her old black attire with a silver star pinned to her belt, not the official Pinkerton badge, but a token that symbolized the law she once upheld. Michael walked beside her, stoic but tense, a faint tick pulsing in his jaw. They entered the main hall. A hush greeted them, broken only by the echo of footsteps on wooden floors. A single overhead chandelier provided meager light. Benches lined the walls, usually occupied by the public during trials, but now deserted. At the far end stood Judge Montgomery, tall, imposing in his black robe, flanked by 4 armed men. A couple more stood guard near the door. Behind the judge, the large double doors leading to the old courtroom remained closed. Harlan was conspicuously absent. Laura suppressed a chill. Maybe still injured, or he's lying in wait. She glanced at Michael, whose eyes flicked around, taking in every angle. Montgomery cleared his throat, voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Mrs. Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood." He paused on Michael's name, letting the shock of seeing William's brother alive linger. "This is quite a family reunion." Michael's face was carved in stone. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Judge." A hint of a sneer flickered on Montgomery's lips. "Very well. You claimed you have the ledger and you wish to bargain you." He looked pointedly at Laura. "Want to leave this territory in peace." Laura set the metal box on a bench, resting one hand protectively on top. "I know you have the power to ensure safe passage. In exchange, you get the ledger. No more bloodshed." Montgomery's icy gaze swept over her. "And why should I believe you won't double-cross me? You set a barn on fire, murdered my men." He gestured dismissively at Doc Wilson. "Brought a sympathetic witness along, I see. Very cunning." Doc Wilson stiffened but said nothing, staying close to Laura's side. "We both know we're out of time," Laura said, mustering a calm tone. "This conflict has cost too many lives. I just want to go. The ledger is worthless to me if I'm dead." Montgomery arched an eyebrow, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Your terms are to hand me that box and I let you ride off scot-free." "Yes." "Tonight," she insisted. "We'll be gone before dawn." The judge studied her for a moment, then nodded at one of his henchmen. The man stepped forward, opening the box. Inside lay the ledger, plain as day. He flipped a few pages, verifying the contents. Montgomery's mouth curved in a triumphant smile. "It appears legitimate." He snapped the box shut, motioning for the henchman to hold it. "Well, that's that." He gestured theatrically. "You are free to go." Laura's pulse spiked. "He's letting us go too easily." She glanced at Michael, who wore a similar expression of distrust. The men around Montgomery tensed, and the judge gave a small nod. Immediately, the guards near the door stepped forward, guns drawn. On second thought, Montgomery said silkily, "I can't have you running around telling tales. I'm afraid I must insist you remain in my custody. Consider it a final sentence, Miss Pinkerton. Doc Wilson cursed under his breath, raising his hands in surrender. Laura's mind raced, predictable. He'll never let us walk out alive. She caught Michael's eye, a silent exchange passing between them. Now Michael whipped out his revolver, firing at the guard to his left. Laura grabbed Doc Wilson, shoving him down behind a bench as bullets whizzed overhead. Montgomery's men returned fire in a thunderous volley. Sparks flew from the wood paneling. Lamps shattered. The overhead chandelier swung wildly, casting frantic shadows. "Secure the ledger," Montgomery yelled, voice ringing with fury. His henchmen clutched the box and scrambled toward a side exit. Laura popped up from behind the bench, ignoring the searing pain in her side. She fired at the man with the box clipping his shoulder. He cried out, dropping the ledger. Another guard tried to retrieve it, but Michael tackled him, sending both crashing into a row of benches. Gunshots cracked in rapid bursts, deafening in the enclosed hall. Laura ducked a bullet that splintered the railing beside her. She aimed at a second guard but missed. He returned fire. She dove behind, a table breath ragged. From across the hall, Montgomery shouted, "End them, you fools!" He crouched behind the judge's bench, face twisted with rage. In the confusion, Doc Wilson crawled to the dropped metal box. Laura saw him clutch it, protectively backing away. A guard advanced on him, revolver raised. Panic jolted through Laura. She leapt up, shooting the guard in the arm. The man staggered back with a curse. A door at the far end burst open. Harlan. His bandaged arm hung stiffly at his side, but he wielded a shotgun in the other, face contorted with pure hatred. He unleashed both barrels in a thunderous blast. Pellets sprayed the room. Laura flattened herself to the floor, wincing as shards of debris peppered her arms. Harlan locked eyes on her from across the chaos. "Pinkerton," he snarled. "I've been waiting for this." He pumped the shotgun, advancing with lethal intent. Laura scrambled behind an overturned bench, firing blindly to keep him at bay. She heard Michael cursing, pinned behind a pillar, as he exchanged shots with three of Montgomery's men. Doc Wilson clutched the box pinned behind a column. In the hail of bullets, a stray shot shattered the chandelier's chain. The heavy fixture plummeted from the ceiling, crashing onto the floor in a burst of flame and glass. The hall filled with choking smoke, the flames licking at the wooden boards. All hell broke loose. As flames devoured the fallen chandelier's oil reserves, tongues of fire spread across the floor. Thick black smoke coiled upward, stinging eyes and lungs. The roiling chaos magnified every gunshot. Laura coughed, blinking through the haze. She glimpsed Harlan's silhouette stepping around the flaming wreckage. The shotgun barked again. Boom buckshot tore through the pillar near Michael, forcing him to roll aside. In a sudden, desperate act of courage, Doc Wilson tried to slip past the flames toward the main doors, the ledger box under one arm. But one of Montgomery's henchmen intercepted him, blocking the path. "You're not taking that anywhere," the thug growled, aiming a revolver point blank. Time slowed as Laura raised her own gun, but the smoke blinded her. Her shot went wide. A muzzle flash lit the gloom. Bang! Doc Wilson staggered, dropping the ledger. Blood spread across his chest as he collapsed with a choked gasp. "No!" Laura screamed, heart-lurching. She sprang forward, ignoring the searing pain, and fired at the thug. Her bullet found its mark, and he crumpled in a heap. She stumbled to Doc Wilson's side, dropping to her knees. Flames crackled, the heat pressing in. He coughed blood on his lips, eyes fluttering open. Laura clutched his hand, tears burning. "Doc." "Oh, God." He managed a weak smile. "Should, have stayed." "In the clinic," he rasped, voice laced with pain. "But I had to help." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Hang on. We'll get you out of here." He shook his head faintly, breath rattling. "No time. Save yourself." His gaze flicked to the ledger box on the floor. Save? Redemption? A final exhale shuddered through him, and his eyes grew distant, unfocused. Laura pressed trembling lips together, agony twisting in her chest. Doc Wilson, the compassionate physician who'd quietly assisted her, who'd delivered half the children in town, gone. Another life destroyed by the judge's corruption. She squeezed his hand, then gently closed his eyes. A primal rage swelled within her. She grabbed the ledger box, rising unsteadily to her feet. Through the swirling smoke, Harlan's outline appeared once more. He coughed, eyes watering, but advanced with predatory precision. "You cost me everything," he snarled. "Now I finish this." Laura's grief hardened into steely resolve. She tucked the ledger box under one arm, leveling her revolver with the other. "Go to hell," she spat. In a heartbeat, Harlan fired. Laura dove aside. The buckshot ripped through a wooden bench, blowing splinters across the room. She tumbled painfully, nearly losing her grip on the box. Flames licked at the edges of her skirt. She rolled to extinguish them, then aimed again. Bang! Her shot grazed Harlan's shoulder, forcing him to stumble. He retaliated with another volley from the shotgun, the blast deafening. She felt a white-hot pain sear across her left thigh. Stars danced in her vision. Staggering, she propped herself against a broken pillar. "I can't die now." She pressed a hand to her bleeding leg. Across the hall, Harlan reloaded with shaky fingers, blood dripping down his torn sleeve. He was a wild animal, cornered by flame. A sudden movement from the left, Michael burst from the smoke, tackling Harlan. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling. They crashed to the floor in a violent struggle. Harlan's fist connected with Michael's jaw. Michael reeled only to drive his elbow into Harlan's side. Blood spattered the scorched floor. Laura limped closer, trying to get a clear shot. The two men rolled across the threshold of the old courtroom, exchanging brutal blows. Montgomery was nowhere in sight, presumably slipped away or pinned down by fire. She prayed he was still inside, trapped if not shot. Gritting her teeth, she dragged herself through the blazing debris into the adjacent room. Half the walls were on fire now. Smoke poured from the ceiling. She spotted Michael and Harlan in a corner by the judge's desk, entangled in a deadly grapple. Laura's lungs burned with every breath. She dropped the ledger box on the desk, ignoring her legs throbbing. Taking aim with trembling hands, she tried to line up a shot, terrified of hitting Michael by accident. Harlan saw the gun barrel, realized the danger. With a roar, he heaved Michael aside, snatched a heavy wooden gavel from the judge's desk, and hurled it at Laura. It struck her wrist, causing her shot to go wild. Pain exploded through her arm, the gun clattering away. Michael lunged again, grabbing Harlan from behind. The two men crashed into a burning bookcase. Flames licked at their clothes. Harlan elbowed Michael in the ribs, then pivoted to slam him into the scorched wall. Laura's heart pounded in terror. She desperately searched for another weapon. Spots danced in her vision from lack of oxygen. The entire building groaned under the weight of the inferno. In a final burst of adrenaline, Michael landed a savage punch to Harlan's jaw. Harlan staggered, disoriented. Michael grabbed the half-burnt ledger box from the desk and swung it like a club. It connected with Harlan's temple, sending him crashing to the floor in a heap. For a moment, neither Laura nor Michael moved, both gasping for air. Harlan lay still, presumably knocked unconscious or dead. Michael coughed, dropping to his knees. "We gotta get out," he managed. Laura's gaze swept the room. "The judge, Montgomery." Her voice cracked, choking on smoke. "Gone," Michael said bitterly. "He must have fled." She clenched her teeth, seething at the missed chance to capture Montgomery. A chunk of the ceiling collapsed with a roar, embers swirling. "We can't stay or we'll burn to death." "Help me," she wheezed, trying to lift Harlan. For all her hatred, she couldn't leave him to the flames if he was still alive. But her injured leg gave out, and she crashed against the wall, crying out in agony. Michael grabbed her arm, hauling her upright. "He's the reason William's dead," he said hoarsely. "Leave him." Laura's vision swam. Every nerve screamed, but some shred of conscience forced her to protest. I can't." Maybe it was William's memory of justice, even for the worst criminals. Michael hesitated, anguish twisted across his face. "Fine," he growled. He stooped to grab Harlan's limp form, hooking an arm under the unconscious man's shoulder. With his other hand, he clutched the battered ledger box. Laura leaned on him. Together they stumbled through the haze of flames, half dragging Harlan's bulk. The corridor was a fiery gauntlet. Coughing half blind, they made slow progress, the heat roasting their skin. Laura's legs threatened to collapse at every step. She clung to Michael for support. Doc Wilson, gone. A final push through the main hall, black with smoke and strewn with bodies. Laura glimpsed a few of Montgomery's men lying unmoving. The judge himself was nowhere in sight, likely fled out a side exit. The front door beckoned. They staggered toward it, the floor beneath them creaking ominously. At last they burst outside. Night air slammed into them like a cool wave. They collapsed onto the dirt, choking and gasping. Townsfolk clustered nearby, eyes wide in horror at the raging inferno. The entire town hall was engulfed in flame sparks, spiraling into the starless sky. Abigail Turner rushed forward with a blanket, pulling Laura away from the flames. Tomas Alvarez and a couple others grabbed Harlan from Michael's grasp, pressing him to the ground, no doubt about to bind him. Laura lay on her back, lungs heaving, tears streaming from smoke-stung eyes. She felt hands pressing on her wounded legs, someone shouting for water. She saw Sarah's face loom over her, tears shimmering. "You're alive," Sarah breathed, voice trembling. Laura nodded weakly, unable to speak. Then blackness swept over her once more. She drifted on the edge of consciousness, aware of a flurry of movement around her. When she finally opened her eyes, sunlight streamed in through a dusty window. She was lying in a cot inside Doc Wilson's clinic, or what remained of it. The doctor's instruments and supplies were scattered, some of the shelves half empty. Sarah sat by her bedside, dozing with her head on folded arms. Laura felt a pang, remembering that Doc Wilson was no longer here to administer care. She swallowed around a dry throat, shifting slightly. A sharp sting radiated from her side, and leg-fresh bandages swaddled her thigh. She exhaled softly, stirring Sarah awake. The girl blinked, rubbing her eyes, then lit with joy at seeing Laura conscious. "You're back," Sarah whispered, tears threatening to spill. Laura nodded, voice hoarse. "How long?" "A day," Sarah said, brushing hair from her face. We were all worried. Doc Wilson is gone." She sniffled, and Laura felt tears prick her own eyes. Quietly, she reached for the girl's hand. "I know. He saved us." They shared a heavy silence. Outside, the faint sounds of hammered nails and raised voices told Laura that the townsfolk were rebuilding, dealing with the fire's aftermath. "How many?" Laura couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Sarah's gaze fell. "At least 3 or 4 men died in the gunfight. Some of them were Montgomery's. The town hall is mostly burned down. Lots of records destroyed." She paused. "Harlan's alive. They locked him up in the old jailhouse with 2 broken ribs and a cracked skull." Relief and dread mingled in Laura's heart. Harlan's alive, but behind bars. She prayed it would last. He always seemed to slither free. And Michael, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Sarah's face. Gone. Some people saw him helping with the rescue. Then he vanished. "Abigail said he left a note for you." "It's on the table." Laura swallowed. "Help me sit up." Sarah supported her as she slowly pushed against the cot, stifling a grimace at the pain. She spied a folded piece of paper near a basin of water. Her hands shook as she opened it, scanning Michael's scrawl. "Laura, I had to leave before the town decided what to do with me. There's still a price on my head, and I'm not ready to face that trial, not yet. I'm taking the ledger. It's safer with me until I can deliver it to the Pinkertons in secret. I'm sorry. Please understand I'm doing this for both of us and for William. Redemption still needs you more than it needs me." Laura's lips tightened. The ledger gone with Michael. He had robbed her of the one piece of tangible proof that could bury the judge's network. Yet she also sensed he might truly deliver it to federal agents, or he could vanish without a trace. Sarah frowned. "Does that mean we can't expose Montgomery?" Laura closed her eyes, letting the note slip through her fingers. "Not with the ledger, but maybe Harlan can testify. He might know enough to bring Montgomery down." The girl's expression grew grim. "Will he talk?" Laura thought of Harlan's vendetta against Montgomery, how the judge had belittled him. Possibly, if threatened with federal charges, Harlan might trade information for leniency. It was a slim hope, but it was all they had. Over the next few days, Laura recovered slowly. Sarah and a few townsfolk brought her food changed. Her bandages did their best to clean her wounds in Doc Wilson's absence. The building had become a makeshift infirmary. Town hall's charred remains still smoldered the air, thick with the acrid scent of ash. Crews of men and women cleared debris while cursing the destruction. Word spread that Judge Montgomery had fled. He disappeared into the night, presumably heading for the next circuit station or beyond. Some speculated he'd meet up with the judge's higher powers. Others believed he'd vanish under a new identity. The vacuum left by his flight plunged redemption into confusion. With the sheriff dead and no official judge, no one knew who held authority. A handful of Pinkerton agents arrived 2 days later, alerted by various telegraph messages, some from concerned citizens, some from accounts of the shootout. They interviewed townsfolk, scribbled notes, made a show of investigating. But Laura suspected infiltration. The judge's network might have informants among them. She answered their questions, carefully revealing only partial truths about the ledger. She didn't mention Michael by name. On the fifth day, an older Pinkerton detective named Alexander Price came to see her at the clinic. He had kind eyes, lines of experience etched into his face. He'd known William once, she recalled. He pulled up a stool by her cot. "Mrs. Blackwood, it's an honor to finally meet you. Your reputation preceded you at the agency." She studied him warily. "Funny way of saying the Pinkertons disowned me for faking my death." He shrugged a rueful smile. "There are those who condemned you for going rogue, but others admired your courage. I'm sorry for your loss and for how events transpired." He glanced around, clearing his throat. "I've read some statements from folks here. They claim a massive conspiracy involving that Judge Montgomery and a group called The Judge. Quite extraordinary." Her eyes narrowed. "Extraordinary but true." Price nodded. "I believe it at least enough to investigate further. The trouble is we lack concrete evidence. The ledger that apparently ties everything together, no one can produce it." Laura forced herself upright, biting back pain. "It was taken by an associate. He claimed he'd turn it over to the Pinkertons. Hasn't arrived yet," No, Price said softly. "If he does, I'll make sure it's acted upon. But for now, we have little to go on." Harlan's locked up, refusing to speak. "Some local men tried to beat a confession out of him, but that won't hold up in a federal court." Laura's jaw clenched. So Harlan's silent. Typical. She took a steadying breath. "Give me a chance to talk to him." Price lifted a brow. "He tried to kill you multiple times, correct?" "Yes," she acknowledged. "But I know his pressure points. If I can get him to talk, we might have enough to track down Montgomery or bigger fish." Price hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll arrange it." The jailhouse sat on the edge of town, 2 cramped cells, a desk, and a single guard. Inside, the walls reeked of stale tobacco and sweat. Harlan sat on a narrow cot, arms folded. A bandage wrapped his head and his left arm was in a sling. Despite the injuries, he exuded menace. A Pinkerton agent hovered near the door, arms crossed. Laura approached slowly, leaning on a cane for support, each step a reminder of her battered body. Harlan's eyes snapped to her, a flicker of dark amusement crossing his features. "You look like hell." She returned a cool stare. "So do you," he shrugged, leaning back against the wall. "Figured you'd be dead by now. Guess you're tougher than I thought." Laura ignored the barb. "I have a proposition for you." Harlan snorted. "Yeah, let me guess you want me to squeal about Montgomery, confess to some grand conspiracy. And what do I get in return if you cooperate?" She said evenly. "The Pinkertons can arrange a reduced sentence. Maybe you avoid the noose." He barked a laugh. "I'm no fool, Pinkerton. They'll hang me anyway for the men I've killed. If not the Pinkertons, then the feds, or that vigilante crowd out there." "I have no incentive to talk." Laura studied him, searching for a weakness. "You know Montgomery left you for dead. He fled while you burned in that building. You owe him nothing." He gave a bitter smile. "I owe no one. But a man's got pride, what's left of it anyway. And some lines I won't cross." She tilted her head. "You call it pride, dying in silence, while a bigger boss scurries away like a rat free to build another empire." Harlan's jaw clenched. "The judge is bigger than Montgomery, bigger than me. One man's testimony won't tear it down. I'd just be signing my own death warrant." Laura sighed, frustration thudding in her temples. "You're already locked in a cell, wounded, with half the town wanting your head. How much worse could it get?" His eyes flickered with something akin to fear, quickly masked. Then he spat on the floor. "I got nothing to say to you." She studied him for a moment, recognizing that behind his bravado lay genuine terror, fear of retribution from the judge's network, possibly fear of a more immediate, brutal retaliation than a quick hanging. She pressed further. "What if we offer more than just leniency, protection, a chance to vanish somewhere? The judge can't find you. Witness protection like the feds do for star witnesses. A new identity in a new territory." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You'd do that." She willed herself to sound convincing. "If it means taking down the judge, yes. The Pinkertons might back that if your testimony is valuable enough. It's your best shot." A tense silence. Finally he exhaled, rubbing his temple gingerly. "Even if I talk, I only know so much. They kept me in the dark about the higher rungs. Montgomery was my link to the judge. Then start with him, everything he told you, every message you carried, every bribe, every murder. That might be enough to track him down and break open the network. Harlan studied her face doubt flickering. Slowly his features hardened in resignation. All right, Pinkerton, I'll talk. But if I smell a double cross, I'll retract it all. See, she nodded. No double cross. We both want the same thing these bastards brought to justice. Harlan smirked faintly, the expression more tragic than triumphant. Funny how things change. We were enemies. Now we're business partners. He shook his head. Get me the Pinkertons or Feds or whoever. I'll sing. 2 days later, the wheels of official justice began creaking to life. Pinkerton Detective Alexander Price gathered a small group of federal marshals who arrived in town, spurred by telegraphs describing the magnitude of corruption. Under guard, they transported Harlan to a more secure location outside Redemption, a small fort where he would provide testimony in exchange for potential witness protection. Laura stood with Sarah on the edge of town watching as Harlan was loaded into a sturdy wagon manacles, binding his wrists. Before mounting, he caught Laura's eye. She swore she saw a flicker of respect. Then the wagon rattled away, escorted by armed marshals. Around them, Redemption was in flux. Townsfolk tried to rebuild the courthouse. Local officials debated who would become interim sheriff, and new whispers circulated that the judge's men might retaliate. A heavy sense of uncertainty lingered, but also a cautious hope. With Harlan's testimony, they might issue warrants for Montgomery and his co-conspirators in the region. Sarah clung to Laura's arm. So it's over. Laura hesitated, gazing at the burnt remains of Town Hall. Not entirely. Montgomery's free somewhere, and the judge's network is bigger than we know. But we've dealt a major blow. With Harlan's confession, the feds can trace the money and start making arrests. Sarah nodded, eyes shining. What about you? Will you stay? Laura considered it. 7 years in this town, living under a shroud of grief and secrecy. Part of her longed to move on, bury the past. Another part recognized that Redemption had become a place she cared about deeply. She saw children playing in the street, farmers carting produce, neighbors helping rebuild. I have a role here now, don't I? She gently squeezed Sarah's shoulder. For now, yes. There's still work to do. Weeks passed. The Pinkertons combed through the region, aided by Harlan's testimony. Rumors flew that federal agents had captured several middle-tier figures in the judge's network. A handful of unscrupulous bankers and land speculators faced indictment. Yet Judge Montgomery remained elusive, a phantom. Some said he slipped south to Mexico. Others claimed he sailed east under an alias. During this time, Laura's wounds gradually healed. She limped less, and the bandages came off her side, leaving a pink scar. The emotional wounds losing Doc Wilson. The shock of Michael's reappearance took longer to mend. She spent many hours helping run a small clinic in the old blacksmith shop, caring for those still suffering from the siege of violence. In the evenings, she found herself gazing at the sunset from her porch, thinking of William. Sarah stuck close, almost like an adopted daughter, helping with chores and errands. The bond between them grew stronger. They seldom spoke of the horrific events, but an unspoken understanding knit them together, a family forged from shared trauma. Then on a crisp morning, a rider approached Laura's house. She opened the door, heart leaping to see Michael dismounting. He wore a travel-stained coat, face grim with exhaustion. Over his shoulder hung a leather satchel that looked suspiciously like the ledger bag. Laura stepped onto the porch, gaze locked on him. Michael. He inclined his head, voice low. Got a minute? She nodded. Sarah peered out from behind Laura, wide-eyed. Should I go? Michael shook his head. No, it's all right. He climbed the porch steps. For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind rustled the dry grass. At last, he opened his satchel, withdrew the ledger, and held it out to Laura. Her breath caught. You brought it back, he nodded. I managed to deliver a copy to the Pinkerton offices in Great Falls, met with an agent named Price who said he already had part of Harlan's confession. The feds are building a case, but the original is safer with you for now, I think. Too many eyes on official desks. Laura hesitated, then carefully took the ledger. The pages had been reorganized, annotated with new notes and references, presumably from Michael's infiltration knowledge. She met his eyes. Thank you. He exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. I'm done with running. My part in this is over. If the Pinkertons want to arrest me for the crimes I committed under the judge, so be it. Sarah looked alarmed, but Laura gave her a reassuring squeeze. You helped bring them down. They might show mercy. Michael's expression darkened with guilt. I don't deserve mercy, but I can't keep hiding. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small battered Pinkerton badge. William's old badge, tarnished but still recognizable. He pressed it into Laura's hand. He would have wanted you to have it. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She stared at the badge, recalling the day William pinned it on his coat, proudly announcing a new case. She closed her fist around it, voice trembling. I'll cherish this. Thank you. Michael bowed his head. Whatever happens next, I'm ready. Laura paused, meeting his gaze. The pain and regret mirrored her own. She slowly said, We'll talk to Price. Explain your role, how you turned against the judge. With Harlan's statement, we have a chance to see you pardoned, or at least not hanged. He swallowed hard, nodding. I'd appreciate that. Sarah beamed with a cautious smile, stepping forward. Then, maybe you can stay in redemption, too. Michael's eyes flicked to Laura, uncertain. We'll see. One step at a time. With the original ledger back in hand, Laura and Michael met Detective Price in the remains of the town hall, now under reconstruction. Price took time to compare the ledger's new annotations with Harlan's statements. He whistled softly. This is comprehensive. If the feds can decode all the ciphers linking these names, we'll have an ironclad case against a wide network. He paused, scanning Michael's stoic face. You're Michael Blackwood. I've heard stories. Michael stiffened, bracing for condemnation. I won't deny I did terrible things. But I want to atone. Price studied him for a moment, then closed the ledger. Atone by testifying in front of a federal court. You corroborate Harlan's confession, confirm details from the ledger, name any co-conspirators you know. That might help your case. Michael inclined his head. I'll do it. Price turned to Laura. As for you, Mrs. Blackwood, you've done us a tremendous service. The Pinkertons might want to reinstate you, or at least consult with you on future cases, but I won't presume to decide your future. Laura glanced at Michael, at the half-rebuilt walls around her, remembering Doc Wilson's dying wish to save redemption. She exhaled softly. My place is here for now. There's more good I can do in town, Doc Wilson's clinic. Sarah's care, making sure no more criminals take root. Price smiled. Understood. We'll keep you informed about the broader investigation. As for Montgomery, he grimaced. He's still in the wind. But with Harlan's testimony, the feds will brand him a fugitive. If he surfaces, they'll hunt him down. Laura nodded, though a cold weight settled in her chest. She wanted closure, Montgomery in handcuffs. But perhaps it would take time. Another month crawled by. Spring came to redemption with a cautious green creeping over the fields. Federal marshals escorted Michael to testify before a territorial judge, an honest one brought in from another region. The hearing spanned days, unveiling the web of corruption, the testimonies of Harlan and Michael, and the supporting details from the ledger's records. Laura attended the sessions along with half the town. Emotions ran high, rage at the judge's infiltration, relief at seeing justice done. Michael's testimony was raw, revealing how he had been manipulated by lies about William and drawn into a cycle of crime. More than once, Laura saw tears in his eyes when recounting William's murder. In the end, the territorial judge recognized Michael's cooperation and acknowledged the extenuating circumstances. He granted a form of conditional clemency, house arrest and redemption, until the final trials concluded, followed by the possibility of a reduced sentence or pardon if all went well. Harlan, on the other hand, faced a more severe fate. He would likely spend the rest of his life in a federal prison. But his cooperation spared him the gallows. As for the higher echelons of the judge's network, the Pinkertons and feds pursued them across state lines. Some were apprehended, others vanished. The name the judge still carried an ominous echo, hinting at shadowy forces that might linger. Yet for now, a significant blow had been dealt. In front of the newly rebuilt town hall, the townspeople gathered on a crisp morning to acknowledge the turning tide. The new sheriff, a steady man named Elijah Harper, stood on the steps with the territorial judge who had presided over Michael's hearing. Laura lingered at the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple black coat. Sarah clutched her hand. Michael was nearby, flanked by Pinkerton guards who allowed him this moment in public. As the judge announced the official charges, The future of redemption felt poised on a knife's edge, haunted by recent trauma, yet hopeful for a safer tomorrow. When it was done, the crowd began to disperse. Abigail Turner approached Laura, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for saving Julie, for stopping those men." I was wrong to doubt you," Laura offered a faint, warm smile. "We all did what we had to." Others murmured agreement. Some who once glared at her with suspicion now whispered thanks. A few placed flowers on a makeshift memorial for the fallen, including Doc Wilson. Laura felt a pang, but also a sense of resolution. He didn't die in vain. Over the following weeks, redemption slowly pieced itself back together. The skeleton of the new courthouse rose from the ashes. Businesses reopened. The farmland revived. Stray outlaws, sensing the shift in power, moved on to other territories. Laura devoted herself to the clinic training under an itinerant doctor who passed through learning enough to bind wounds, administer medicine. In her spare time, she replaced the charred timbers and broken glass of her home with help from local carpenters. Sarah insisted on assisting, hammering nails with surprising vigor for her age. Michael spent his days quietly under house arrest, living in a small rented room near the church. He wore an ankle shackle that tethered him to a radius around town. He helped with manual labor, re-roofing the saloon, repairing the stable's acts of penance. Some townsfolk regarded him with lingering distrust, but over time a fragile acceptance formed. One evening near sunset, Laura found Michael leaning on the church's fence, gazing at the horizon. She approached the Pinkerton badge that once belonged to William Heavy in her pocket. He looked at her, a soft, sad smile on his lips. "Hello." She stepped beside him, following his gaze. The Montana sky gleamed with gold and crimson. "You're doing well?" He shrugged, trying. A gentle wind swept past, rustling their clothes. After a reflective silence, Laura said, "I still miss him. Every day." Michael's throat bobbed. "Me too." She slipped her hand into her coat pocket, pulling out the battered badge. She held it out to him. This was William's. "I think you should have it." His eyes filled with conflicted emotion. "But you said I have my memories, my love for him." This was a symbol of justice. "Maybe keeping it close will remind you of what you can still do." He swallowed hard, tears glistening. Slowly he accepted the badge, running his thumb over the tarnished surface. "Thank you," he murmured. "I don't know if I'll ever be worthy of it." She touched his arm gently. "No one's asking you to be perfect. Just try to do right from now on." He closed his fist around the badge. "I will." They stood there a while, watching the sun sink behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in a blaze of color. For the first time in years, Laura felt a stirring of peace, a sense that she had begun the long journey toward healing. 6 months later. The air was warmer, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine. Redemption had a new spirit. The fresh courthouse stood proud, its facade gleaming with fresh paint. Townsfolk bustled with renewed purpose. A small crowd gathered in front of the courtyard, Pinkerton detectives, federal marshals, and local leaders. A line of covered wagons waited, loaded with crates of evidence and documents from the Ledger's trail. They were departing for a larger federal district court to finalize the crackdown on the judge's network. It was a testament to how far the case had come, how deeply William's memory and Laura's perseverance had shaken that hidden empire. Laura watched from the sidelines, standing with Sarah, who had grown taller and more confident, a young teenager brimming with quiet strength. Next to them stood Michael, the ankle shackle removed at last. The territorial judge had granted him supervised freedom pending a final review. He was effectively a free man on the path to a full pardon. Sarah waved enthusiastically as Detective Alexander Price emerged from a wagon, tipping his hat in farewell. "We'll nail the rest of them," Price promised. "Montgomery can't hide forever. Sooner or later, we'll drag him back here in chains." Laura nodded. "Good luck." She hesitated, then extended her hand. "Thank you for helping us find justice." Price shook her hand warmly. "Thank you for reminding us what the Pinkerton motto truly stands for." He cast a glance at Michael. "And keep an eye on him." Michael gave a half smile. "I'll behave." With that, the Pinkertons and marshals climbed onto their wagons. Horses' wickered hooves clopped on dusty ground. The small convoy rolled out of town, heading eastward. Laura exhaled, shoulders relaxing. A hush fell, broken only by the bustle of everyday life. The final weight seemed to lift from Redemption's shoulders. They had survived darkness and brutality, corruption and betrayal. Now those scars remained, there was hope. Sarah tugged on Laura's sleeve. Come on. We promised to help with the new clinic building. Laura nodded, smiling at the girl. Right behind you. They walked down the main street together. Laura, Sarah, and Michael passed shops with fresh coats of paint, past neighbors who paused to wave or offer friendly greetings. A sense of community pulsed here, a place reclaimed from fear. At the far end of town, near a patch of green fields, stood the new clinic under construction. Abigail turned her arms dusted with sawdust, hammered nails with fierce dedication, while a group of volunteers carried planks. Laura stepped up, rolling her sleeves. She could still feel twinges in her leg and side, but she pushed through, determined to contribute. Sarah joined in, carrying smaller boards with surprising gusto. Michael picked up a hammer and went to work beside them. As the afternoon wore on, laughter drifted amid the pounding of nails, the saws rasped. The sun dipped lower, painting the valley in hues of orange and pink. In that glow, the future looked brighter, an evolving story shaped by those who refused to surrender to despair. When the day's labor ended, they gathered on the porch for a simple meal, fresh bread stew, cups of cool water. The chatter was light, occasionally dipping into memories of what they'd lost. But more often, they spoke of what might come: expansions to the school farmland, improvements, safer roads, maybe even a telegraph line connecting them better to the outside world. Finally, as dusk fell, Laura gazed beyond the rooftops across rolling hills that faded into purple twilight. A soft hush settled over her heart. She felt William's presence in the wind and the glow of the setting sun. We did it, my love. We brought them to justice. Sarah tugged her sleeve. Look, she whispered. A lean gray wolf stood some distance away at the edge of the tall grass, watching them. Once Laura would have tensed in fear, a reminder of lurking danger. But something in the wolf's posture looked almost peaceful. Their eyes met across the twilight, an unspoken understanding. Then the wolf dipped its head and padded off into the shadows of the meadow, leaving only quiet footsteps behind. Laura closed her eyes, a gentle smile forming. She turned to Sarah and Michael, to the small group of townsfolk finishing their tasks, to the half-built clinic that promised healing instead of harm. Redemption had earned its name at last.